10 years ago, my son went missing after a cargo ship exploded in the Atlantic. They never found his body, and eventually everyone accepted that he was gone. But at 4:07 a.m., my phone rang unexpectedly. A trembling voice whispered, "Dad, I'm at Harbor Gate 7. Please come get me." 30 minutes later, a man stepped out of the darkness with a face identical to my son's. Those same eyes, that same scar, that same voice. I pulled him into a tight hug, my heart nearly breaking. But in that very moment, I realized something was terribly, terribly wrong. This is a story about family betrayal and rebuilding trust. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell me what's the weather like. Where you are right now, I read everyone, and your presence here matters. Quick note, some details have been fictionalized for storytelling. The lesson at the heart of this story is what matters most. The phone call at 4:07 in the morning came from a dead man. I knew the exact time because I'd been awake since 3:30, the way I'd been for most of the past 10 years, staring at Galveston Bay through bedroom windows of a mansion that felt hollow despite its 12 rooms. At 68, I'd built Harrington Maritime Holdings from a single cargo vessel into a $200 million empire. Yet every morning, I woke to the void my son Soren left when his boat went down in the Atlantic a decade ago. The phone display read, Harbor Gate 7, Galveston Port Authority. I picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Father," the voice said, trembling, exhausted, unmistakably young. "Father, I'm at Harbor Gate 7. Please help me." My hand tightened on the phone. The cadence was right. The slight rasped sentence ends the way words tumbled forward, afraid of silence. But Soren had never called me father. Not once in 28 years. Always dad. Sometimes the old man when joking, never father. 10 years, and now this voice cut through the Gulf Coast night. "And stay there," I said. "I'm coming." I was in my Lincoln within 4 minutes, driving through empty Galveston streets toward the industrial port, where cargo ships lined up like sleeping giants under sodium lights. The Gulf wind carried salt and diesel through my open window. My hands on the wheel were perfectly steady. That's how I knew I wasn't the desperate old man someone thought I was. 40 years in maritime shipping teaches you to read people, which handshakes mean a deal and which ones mean a lawsuit, which smiles are genuine and which ones cover the knife sliding between your ribs. And this, when a miracle appears at 4:07 in the morning, someone's running a con. The question wasn't whether the voice belonged to my son. The question was who needed me broken enough to weaponize Soren's face, and what they planned to take once I was. I turned onto Harbor Road. The Port Authority gate loomed ahead, chain link and floodlights cutting geometric shadows across cracked asphalt. A figure stood beneath yellow glow, gaunt shoulders hunched in a worn sailor's coat that looked like it had crossed oceans. I pulled to the curb and killed the engine. The man turned. Green eyes, square jaw, the slight hook in his nose where Soren broke it playing high school baseball. Even his posture weight on left foot right hand gripping opposite elbow matched the stance I'd memorized from a decade of photographs. I stepped out. The Gulf wind pulled at my shirt. He took 3 steps forward, face fully visible under the lights. If this was a copy, it was masterwork. Cheekbones exact. Hairline precise. Even the small scar above his left eyebrow, where Soren needed 4 stitches at age 9. "Hey, Dad," he said, voice breaking. "It's really me. I'm home." I opened my arms. He fell into them. And I knew. Soren had a ritual from age 7 that never stopped. Every hug, goodbye at airports. Good morning in the kitchen, consolation after his mother's funeral, ended the same way. 3 pats on my back, quick rhythmic. 1, 2, 3. Every single time, for 21 years, right up until the morning, he boarded the vessel that took him into the Atlantic. This man held me still. Arms wrapped tight, breathing ragged against my shoulder body, trembling with what I was supposed to believe was relief and exhaustion, and the weight of 10 impossible years. But no 3 pats. Not 2, not 4. Not the unconscious rhythm that had been Soren's signature since childhood. Just stillness where truth should have been. I held the embrace 5 seconds longer than necessary. Let him think I was overcome. Let him believe the grief-stricken father was too destroyed by hope to think clearly. I pulled back, gripped his shoulders, looked into those perfect green eyes someone had paid a surgeon to craft. "Let me take you home, son," I said, voice carrying exactly the right tremor. "You must be exhausted. I can't believe I'm finally back." He wiped at his eyes. Real tears or good performance. I thought about this moment every single day. So did I said, truth and lie woven together. I led him to the Lincoln. He slid into the passenger seat, Soren's seat empty for a decade, and I started the engine. The dashboard clock read 4:43, 36 minutes since the phone call, 36 minutes since someone tried to change everything. Because here's what they didn't understand. I'd spent 10 years building walls around the wound Soren left. I'd spent 10 years learning to function with half my heart gone. I'd become someone who could sit across from an imposter, wearing my son's face and feel nothing but cold strategic clarity. Whoever sent this man thought they were exploiting my grief. What they'd actually done was hand me a thread, and I was very good at pulling threads until entire operations unraveled. I drove through pre-dawn darkness, listening to him manufacture stories about amnesia and fishing boats and slowly recovering memories. His performance was flawless. Someone had trained him well, taught him Soren's vocal patterns. His mannerisms probably fed him 100 family details to deploy at strategic moments. But they'd missed the 3 pats, that tiny private ritual existing nowhere in photographs or documents. The kind of detail only a real father and real son would know. And now I knew 3 things with absolute certainty. First, this man wasn't Soren. Second, whoever built this deception had access to deep information about my family. Third, they'd made the fatal mistake of thinking a grieving father was the same thing as a stupid one. I pulled into the mansion driveway as eastern sky started to gray. At Harbor Gate, 7 under those sodium lights, Thane Prescott 37 and gaunt beneath his worn coat, had stood trembling with a surgically altered face that was nearly perfect replica of my missing son. The imposter stared at the house like he was coming home. I stared at him, calculating exactly how long I'd let this play out before I dismantled everyone involved. "Welcome back, son," I said, and I meant it, because he'd just walked into the trap he thought he was setting. I showed the imposter to Soren's old bedroom at 5 in the morning, then went downstairs and started cooking my dead son's favorite breakfast for a stranger wearing his face. The smell of chorizo and eggs felt like a betrayal of memory itself. Dawn light filtered through the kitchen windows overlooking Galveston Bay. I'd bought the chorizo from Powell's Market, the same spicy blend Soren could smell from his bedroom, and be downstairs in 30 seconds. Sunday tradition for 18 years. Scrambled eggs with chorizo Texas sourdough toast, and exactly 3 shakes of Cholula hot sauce on the side. I cracked 6 eggs into the cast iron skillet. The sizzle filled the kitchen along with the rich, smoky scent of pork and paprika. My hands moved through familiar motions while my mind cataloged everything from the car ride home, the way Thane held his hands, the hesitation before answering questions, the too perfect recovery of childhood memories. On my phone's security monitor, the imposter slept upstairs on his back mouth, slightly open chest, rising and falling in steady rhythm. But Soren had asthma since age 12. His breathing always carried a faint whistle on the exhale, especially when sleeping. This man's breathing was smooth, unrestricted, healthy. Another tell, another crack in the performance. "I'm not cooking breakfast," I said to the empty kitchen. "I'm setting traps." Footsteps on the stairs at 7 sharp. I plated the eggs laid out. The toast poured coffee into Soren's favorite chipped University of Oregon Ducks mug. Thane entered wearing Soren's old Oregon Ducks sweatshirt, hair damp from the shower. He crossed to the breakfast table and sat in the exact chair Soren had claimed since childhood. Left side, facing the water, no hesitation. Every gesture landed perfectly. The way he wrapped both hands around the coffee mug, the grateful smile that crinkled his eyes, even the small exhale of contentment as he smelled the chorizo. Too perfect, like an actor who'd memorized blocking but didn't know the character's breathing. "Yet this smells incredible, Dad," he said, just like I remembered every single day for 10 years. "Your favorite," I said, settling across from him. "I haven't made it since—" I let the sentence trail off, watched him fill the silence. "Since I left," his voice dropped. "I know. I'm so sorry for what I put you through." I nodded, chewing slowly. He took his first bite, closed his eyes in apparent bliss, then reached for the salt shaker. Not the hot sauce. Soren added exactly 3 shakes of Cholula to his eggs before tasting. Every single time. 18 years of Sunday breakfasts made it muscle memory. This man salted his eggs like a normal person and ate them plain. I said nothing, just filed it away with the missing back pats and the smooth breathing and the word father instead of dad. Here's what 40 years of reading Corporate Liars taught me: the better the performance, the more rehearsal time they had, and the more they're hiding. The bay looks exactly how I remembered it, Thane said, staring out the windows. I used to sit here every morning and watch the cargo ships come in. True, Soren had done exactly that. Someone had fed this man detailed memories, coached him through family rituals, prepared him for every question. But they'd missed the hot sauce, and they'd missed the breathing, and they'd definitely missed what happened next. The click of nails on hardwood announced anchor before I saw him. My 11-year-old golden retriever padded into the kitchen with morning enthusiasm, graying muzzle lifted to catch the scent of chorizo. His tail wagged in wide arcs as he approached me, and I reached down to scratch behind his ears. "Hey there, old boy," Thane said, voice warm. "Remember me? It's been so long." Anchor's tail stopped mid-wag. The dog had been moving toward Thane, drawn by the voice and extended hand. But 3 feet away, he froze. His hackles rose slightly along his spine. His ears flattened. I watched it happen in real time, the biological recognition system that no amount of plastic surgery could fool. "He's gotten slower," I said carefully. "Age does that." Thane dropped a piece of bacon on the floor. Soren's old trick, the one that always sent Anchor into happy chaos. The dog stared at the bacon, then at Thane, then backed up 2 steps instead of lunging forward. "Anchor." Thane tried again, patting his knee. "Come here, boy." The retriever turned and left the kitchen. I heard him settle in his bed by the fireplace, tags jingling as he circled 3 times before lying down. Dogs don't lie. They can't be coached or fooled or convinced by a perfect performance. Anchor had loved Soren more than he loved me more than anyone. If this were my son sitting across from me, that dog would be crying with joy, not retreating to his bed. In that moment, watching my dog reject the man wearing my son's face, I understood the full cruelty of what someone had built a weapon designed to destroy me from the inside out. "I should shower," Thane said, standing. "Get cleaned up properly. This still feels like a dream." "Take your time," I said. "You're home now." He smiled and headed upstairs. I waited until I heard the bathroom door close, pipes singing as water rushed through them. Then I pulled out my encrypted phone, the one I used for corporate crises, hostile takeover attempts, union negotiations that couldn't be traced. I scrolled to Russell Farrell's contact. 30 years of friendship, 22 years FBI before he retired and started his private investigation firm. If anyone could help me dismantle this conspiracy without tipping my hand, it was Russell. I had 2 pieces of evidence, 3 missing backpats, and 1 honest dog. But someone had spent enough time and money to surgically create my son's face. They weren't amateurs. They had resources, patience, and they thought they'd found my weakness. I pressed the call button and listened to it ring. Upstairs, water ran through the pipes. The imposter showered in my son's bathroom, using my son's towels, living my son's stolen life. But in 60 seconds, I would have a former FBI investigator on my side. And that man upstairs had no idea I was about to turn this mansion into a trap with only 1 exit through the truth. Russell picked up on the 3rd ring. "I need you here," I said. "Tomorrow morning. Tell no one." "I'll be there at 8, he said, and hung up. No questions. That's why we'd been friends for 30 years. I put the phone down as Bettina's Mercedes pulled into the driveway. 2 o'clock exactly. My daughter arrived to embrace the brother she supposedly hadn't seen in 10 years. And I watched her face with the same cold analysis I'd used to spot a fraudulent cargo manifest. Through the window, Bettina stepped out in full CFO armor, tailored navy suit, hair pulled back severe. My daughter, 42, and razor-sharp as CFO of Galveston Maritime. Holdings moved with calculated precision. Behind her, Lyle emerged in his attorney's charcoal suit, briefcase in hand, even on a Sunday. Bettina paused at the front door. 1 deep breath. Eyes closed for exactly 2 seconds. An actor preparing to go on stage. I opened the door before she could knock. "Dad," her voice carried exactly the right tremor. "Is it true? Is he really home?" "Come in, sweetheart," I said. "Come see for yourself." Lyle Thornton, 45, and impeccably composed, shook my hand with practiced grip. 2.3 seconds of contact, corporate protocol to the millisecond. "This must be overwhelming for you, Lester," Lyle said. "A miracle after all these years. Overwhelming doesn't begin to cover it." I met his eyes. Nothing about this feels real yet. Bettina moved past us into the living room where Thane stood by the bay windows. She stopped, stared at him. I watched her face with surgical precision. There it was, 0.3 seconds of absolute stillness before the tears began. The exact micro-pause of someone accessing a rehearsed emotion, rather than experiencing a genuine one. I'd seen it 1,000 times in negotiations, the fraction of a second it takes to recall which expression you need to perform. Then the tears came, perfectly timed, perfectly calibrated. "Soren," she breathed, rushing forward. "Oh my God, Soren, I thought you were dead. I mourned you." Thane caught her in his arms. "I'm so sorry, Bets. I tried to get home. I tried so hard." They held each other. She sobbed into his shoulder. He stroked her hair with exactly the right tenderness. The performance was flawless, museum quality, too flawless. You know what's worse than watching your daughter lie to your face? Realizing she learned how to do it by watching you run a corporation for 40 years. I'd taught her to read balance sheets, negotiate contracts, maintain composure under pressure. I'd taught her to separate emotion from strategy. And now she was using every lesson to destroy me with a weapon wearing my son's face. While Bettina embraced Thane, Lyle stood beside me. His hand found my shoulder in shared amazement. But his eyes weren't on the reunion. They swept the room in quick darting movements, checking the security camera angle, noting desk placement, cataloging sightlines like an auditor, confirming everything matched the inventory list. Not the look of a rejoicing brother-in-law, the look of someone verifying a project was running on schedule. "Your family must be in shock," Lyle said, still watching the room. "Have you contacted anyone, the police, press?" "Not yet." I kept my voice steady. Wanted to make sure it was real first. "Of course." His eyes darted to the bay windows. "Best to keep this quiet until you're certain. Protect the family." "That's exactly what I intend to do, Lyle. Protect my family." His hand tightened on my shoulder for half a second before releasing. We understood each other perfectly. We were both lying, and we both knew it, and we were both pretending we didn't. They stayed for 2 hours. Bettina asked Thane careful questions about his missing years, feeding him openings for rehearsed stories. Lyle made coffee, checked his watch 3 times with increasing frequency. When they left, Bettina hugged me at the door. "I'm so happy, Dad," she whispered. "Our family is whole again." "Yes," I said, "whole again." I watched their Mercedes disappear down the Oak Line Drive. Then I went to my study and poured 3 fingers of bourbon I had no intention of drinking. The knock came at 8 that evening. Zelda Blanchard, 60 years old, and my personal secretary for 25 years, stood in the doorway holding a small cardboard box. "Mrs. Harrington left this in my safekeeping 3 years ago, sir," she said quietly. "She said I would know when you needed it." My throat tightened. "Frances left something for me. She made me promise." Zelda's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I think now is the time, sir." She placed the box on my desk and left, closing the study door with a soft click. Some men fear death. I feared opening that box because Frances had never been wrong about our children, and I had never been right. I lifted the lid. Frances's leather-bound diary lay inside, worn edges soft from years of handling. A yellow sticky note marked the final entry, dated 3 weeks before cancer took her. Her handwriting was still elegant despite her illness. "Lester," she'd written. "If you are reading this, I want you to know Bettina is not evil. She is not broken. She has starved for your love for 20 years, and you never looked at her, not once. Not the way you looked at Soren, not the way you look at cargo manifests and quarterly reports." My hands shook. The bourbon sat forgotten. "I fear one day she will do something unforgivable just to force you to see her. When that day comes, and I believe it will come, remember that she learned to starve in our house. We fed Soren's dreams. We fed your empire, but we never fed our daughter's heart." The entry ended there. No signature, no farewell, just truth delivered like a knife between the ribs. Frances had known. She'd seen what I was too blind to see, and I'd slept next to her for 38 years without understanding. I closed the diary and placed it on my desk, her words burning in my mind. She had predicted Bettina would do something unforgivable to force my attention, but Frances couldn't have known the specific shape of that betrayal, a surgically constructed imposter, a conspiracy requiring years of planning and a daughter cold enough to orchestrate it all. The question wasn't whether Bettina was guilty. The question was whether I had created the monster who now lived in my house or simply failed to prevent one from forming. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my study with Frances's diary open to her final entry, reading it until her words stopped being words and became accusations. By 7 in the morning, I had my answer. I hadn't created the monster. I'd simply been too busy building an empire to notice one forming in my own house. At 8 sharp, I walked into Russell Farrell's office on Strand Street and said 6 words that would change everything. The man in my house isn't Soren. Russell's office occupied a converted warehouse in Galveston's historic Strand district. Red brick walls, 15-foot ceilings, harbor maps covering every surface. He looked up from his coffee, read my face in one glance, and closed his laptop without a word. Russell Farrell, 62, and carrying 3 decades of FBI investigative instinct in his steady gaze, had been my friend for 30 years. He'd investigated organized crime and Houston corruption in Austin, and now did private work for people who needed help that didn't come with press releases. "You look like you haven't slept in 2 days, Lester," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Sit down." "I haven't slept in 10 years, Russell, but the last 48 hours have been particularly educational." He poured a second cup of coffee and slid it across. "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning." So I did, methodically, like presenting a corporate briefing. The 4:07 a.m. call from Harbor Authority. The voice that said, "Father," instead of "Dad." The embrace at the gate that lacked 3 rhythmic backpats. A ritual Soren had performed for 21 years without fail. The smooth breathing without asthmatic whistle. The missing hot sauce. Anchor backing away from bacon. Then Bettina's arrival. The 0.3-second delay before her tears began. The way she fed Thane opening lines for rehearsed stories. Lyle's eyes sweeping the room like an auditor checking inventory, not a brother-in-law rejoicing in miracles. Russell listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. 30 years of federal investigations had taught him when to ask questions and when to simply absorb data. "The 3 backpats," I said. "Soren did it from age 7 until the day he disappeared. Every single hug. This man held me completely still." Russell wrote something, underlined it. "My dog backed away from Bacon Russell. Anchor has never refused bacon in 11 years. Another note, another underline. And your daughter arrived within hours of his appearance," Russell said, still writing. 0.3-second delay before the tears. "Yes." He set down his pen, placed both hands flat on the desk, a gesture I recognized from decades of friendship, the signal that Russell had processed everything and reached a conclusion. "What do you need from me?" No skepticism, no questions about whether I was certain, just immediate acceptance and operational thinking. That's when I knew Russell's FBI instincts had already detected something wrong before I'd walked through his door. "I need to know who he is," I said, "who sent him, and whether my daughter orchestrated this or if someone's using her too." Russell nodded slowly. "The physical resemblance you described, that level of accuracy, suggests plastic surgery, professional work, years of preparation. We're not talking about a simple con. We're talking about a coordinated operation with significant resources. Let me tell you what separates amateur cons from professional ones. Amateurs focus on the surface details. Professionals understand that the real deception is in the micro behaviors, and they always miss something. This operation had missed the 3 backpats. They'd missed what Soren's breathing sounded like. They'd missed how a dog would react to surgical replication versus biological recognition. But they'd gotten everything else right, which meant someone with deep access to my family's history had built this trap. "Here's how we proceed," Russell said. "You stay inside. Keep playing the Grateful Father. The moment they know you're onto them, they'll disappear or accelerate whatever their endgame is. And you, I operate externally, track the imposter's real identity, financial trails, surgical records, any connection to Bettina or Lyle. We were building a trap with 2 walls, mine, made of warmth and welcome. Russell's made of forensic evidence and federal databases. And somewhere between those walls, the truth would eventually have nowhere left to hide." "How long will it take to identify him?" I asked. Russell tapped his pencil against the pad. "Depends on how careful they were. But plastic surgery leaves paper trails, intake forms before and after documentation, surgical consultations. Give me 72 hours. What do you need from me?" He pulled out his encrypted phone and began scrolling through contacts. 22 years FBI, another 15 as private investigator. He knew people in every corner of the medical legal complex. "I'll need a DNA sample," he said. "Hair preferably. something you can obtain legally without arousing suspicion. I placed a fresh comb in the guest bathroom yesterday morning, I said. Chain of custody clean. Russell looked up, and for the first time that morning, he smiled. Not with warmth, with professional appreciation. You really did build your empire by thinking 3 moves ahead. They're 4 moves, Russell. I learned early that the 3rd move is where amateurs stop. He made a call, spoke quietly for 90 seconds. When he hung up, he wrote something on the pad and slid it across the desk. A name, Dr. Verna Sinclair, UTMB Galveston, forensic pathologist. She owes me a favor, Russell said. She'll run the comparison discreetly. Get me that comb today. I'll have preliminary results by Thursday morning. I stood, shook his hand, felt the first genuine hope I'd experienced since answering the phone 2 days ago. Russell, thank you. Don't thank me yet, he said. When we find out who's behind this, you might not like the answer. I already know my daughter's involved. Knowing and proving are different things. He walked me to the door. Ann Lester, be careful. Whoever built this operation anticipated most scenarios. They might have contingencies we haven't imagined. I drove back to the mansion while Russell was already on the phone with Dr. Sinclair setting DNA analysis in motion. Within 72 hours, we'd know the imposter's real biological identity. But the question that gnawed at me wasn't who he was. It was who had found him, shaped him, and sent him to my harbor gate with surgical precision. Because whoever orchestrated this knew my family's most intimate details, understood my greatest vulnerability, and had the resources to manufacture a ghost. That kind of knowledge only comes from inside. The drive back from Russell's office took 15 minutes. I spent every second thinking about that phrase, inside knowledge. Someone with access to my family's most intimate details had built this trap. The list of candidates was short, and my daughter's name sat at the very top. The next morning, I walked my imposter son through the glass doors of Galveston Maritime Holdings at 9 a.m., sharp ready to watch him perform for an audience that had known the real Soren since he was 22. The 12th floor executive suite overlooked Galveston Bay, floor-to-ceiling, glass walls, maritime navigation charts mounted like artwork, the scent of coffee mixing with salt air drifting through the ventilation system. Zelda had quietly alerted senior staff that morning. Soren Harrington had returned from the dead. The boardroom filled quickly. Executives I'd worked with for decades lined up to welcome him home. Some were already wiping away tears before Thane even spoke. I can't believe I'm standing here again, Thane said, his voice cracking at precisely the right moment. I thought about this building every single day. The real Soren had called this building his second prison. He'd wanted to design ships, not shuffle corporate papers. He'd spent 3 years as an engineer before the Atlantic took him, resenting every board meeting, every quarterly report, every moment spent managing instead of creating. But the executives didn't remember that. They remembered the polite young man who'd smiled through their stories and attended their retirement parties. Let's see how well they trained you, I thought, watching him work the room. And work it he did. Thane moved through the crowd like a politician at a fundraiser, remembering every name, every detail with uncanny precision. He approached Margaret Hayes from accounting, a woman Soren had barely acknowledged in 3 years of working in the same building. Margaret, Thane said warmly. You look exactly the same, still keeping this place's books pristine. Margaret's face lit up. Soren, yes, still at it. Welcome home. He turned to Frank Rourke, senior operations manager. Frank, congratulations again on Sarah's wedding. I'm sorry I missed it. Frank looked stunned with gratitude. You remembered, that means so much. But Soren didn't know Frank had a daughter named Sarah. He'd certainly never known about any wedding. The real Soren barely spoke to operations staff unless a ship design required their input. Thane was performing from a script, an incredibly detailed, meticulously researched script that someone had fed him about every peripheral employee in this building. The kind of intelligence gathering that takes months, maybe years. Too perfect. That was the tell. He knew things the real Soren had never bothered to learn. Here's what they didn't understand about corporate warfare. The most dangerous people in any organization aren't the executives in corner offices. They're the independent board members who owe nothing to anyone and see everything. Elmer Delaney approached from the coffee station, 61 years old, 12 years as independent board member, a man who'd watched Soren grow from nervous intern to confident engineer. He'd attended Soren's birthday dinners, knew his laugh, remembered his tells. Elmer shook Thane's hand warmly. Soren, good to have you back, son. This company missed you. Thank you, Mr. Delaney. It's good to be home. Tell me, Elmer said, his tone casual, almost conversational. Do you remember that little path leading to Warehouse 4? Is the old name sign still up? Thane paused, half a second, maybe less. I think it is, he said. Hard to remember all the details after so long. Elmer nodded politely. Of course, 10 years changes a lot of things. He patted Thane's shoulder and moved away, catching my eye for a fraction of a second before turning toward the windows. Thane continued his rounds. More hugs, more perfect memories, more tears from staff members who desperately wanted the miracle to be real. 30 minutes later, after Thane had excused himself to the executive washroom, Elmer touched my elbow and guided me toward the corridor window overlooking the bay. His voice dropped to a whisper reserved for boardroom confidences. Lester, I need to tell you something. I turned to face him. I'm listening, Elmer. He glanced back toward the boardroom, then met my eyes. I don't know who that man is, but that is not Soren. Standing there with Elmer watching my imposter son charm a room full of people who should have known better, I realized something profound. I wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. Tell me why, I said quietly. Your son called that path Nana's Lane, Elmer said, named after his grandmother when she laid the first warehouse cornerstone in 1987. Frances told me about it at Soren's 25th birthday party. She was so proud he'd honored her mother that way. Soren never called it anything else, not once in 3 years of working here. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. You knew the moment he failed the test, I said. Elmer nodded. The moment he hesitated, Soren would have corrected me immediately. It's Nana's Lane, Mr. Delaney, probably with that little smile he used when people forgot the proper names of things. I made a decision. Trust. I told Elmer everything in 90 seconds, the 3 back pats the dog. Bettina's 0.3-second delay. Russell's investigation, the DNA sample. Elmer listened without shock, processing information like the corporate strategist he'd been for 40 years. When I finished, he asked one question. What do you need from me? I need someone inside this building watching, I said. Bettina has CFO access to everything. Lyle has attorney privileges. If they're making moves, I need to know. You think Bettina orchestrated this? I think someone with intimate knowledge of this family built this deception, I said. And that list is very, very short. Elmer looked out at the bay at the cargo ships moving through channels Soren used to track from these same windows. I'll be at every board meeting, every corporate function watching. If your daughter or that attorney husband of hers makes one wrong move, I'll see it. Thane emerged from the washroom, smile back in place, ready for round 2 of his performance. Thank you, Elmer, I said. Don't thank me yet. He straightened his tie. When this is over, we're going to have some difficult conversations about succession planning, because whoever comes out of this mess, it won't be that man pretending to be your son. 2 allies in 36 hours, Russell working the forensic angle Elmer, controlling the corporate high ground. But the clock was ticking. Whoever built this conspiracy had invested years of planning and serious money. They wouldn't wait forever to collect their return. That afternoon at the office, I'd secured Elmer as my corporate watchdog. 2 allies in 2 days. But alliances meant nothing without evidence, which is why I texted Russell at 7 p.m. server room 10 o'clock come alone. The server room that housed my proudest technological achievement, the Harbor Eye tracking system, would become the chamber where I discovered exactly how my daughter had been planning to destroy me. Russell arrived at 10 sharp, carrying his encrypted laptop in a weathered messenger bag. The server room occupied a windowless corner of the 12th floor, accessible only by biometric scan and master keycard. The space hummed with cooling fans, blue LED lights casting shadows across 20 feet of server racks. The air smelled like ozone and cold metal. You said this system logs everything, Russell said, setting his laptop on the single desk. How far back does it go? I unlocked the master console. 18 months of unalterable records. Every file access, every login, every document download, time-stamped to the second. And Bettina doesn't know you can see her tracks. Nobody does except me, Zelda, and now you. I pulled up the authentication screen. Even Bettina as CFO couldn't enter this room without logging her credentials. She signed off on the system herself. Russell smiled grimly. The irony. That's one word for it. I explained the system's genesis while my fingers moved across the keyboard. built after a $2 million embezzlement case in 2022, an accounting manager who'd covered his tracks for 3 years before I caught him. The corporate board approved Harbor Eye to track cargo movements and prevent internal theft. But I'd built in a feature nobody knew about: complete internal data access logging for all employees, including family. So every file Bettina has touched in the last 18 months, every single one, I said. The system captures screenshots, access duration, even cursor movements if I want them. It was designed to catch sophisticated internal threats. Like your daughter. I never thought I'd need it for my daughter. I ran the query show all executive file access for Bettina Harrington Thornton category estate /inheritance/shareholder. The screen populated. 47 distinct timestamps. There's a special kind of pain in watching your own security system, the one you built to protect everything you love, become the instrument that proves your child betrayed you. Russell leaned closer to the screen. First entry July 18, 2023. Last entry October the 13th, 2023. 3 months, I said. My voice sounded hollow in the humming room. Russell scrolled, slowly reading each file name aloud. Estate distribution documents, shareholder registry, Soren's Memorial Fund disbursement plans, insurance policy beneficiary records, trust execution clauses, voting rights allocation, executive succession protocols. 47 times, I said quietly. She was mapping the entire financial architecture, Russell said. Every asset, every clause, every succession mechanism. This isn't casual curiosity, Lester. This is systematic intelligence gathering. I clicked on the first timestamp, July 18th, 2023, 11:43 p.m. The system displayed everything Bettina had done during that session. 23 minutes logged in. Accessed 14 separate estate documents. Printed nothing that would trigger paper logs. Instead, the cursor tracking showed her positioning each document on screen, pausing, then moving to the next. Photographing with her phone. Professional tradecraft, Russell said. She understood your security protocols. I taught her those protocols, I said. She learned them watching me build this company for 40 years. I scrolled through the sessions. Most occurred between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. after hours when the office was empty. Duration varied 20 minutes to 2 hours. She never came on consecutive nights, varied her schedule by days, sometimes weeks. Sophisticated operational security designed to avoid detection algorithms. Those 47 timestamps weren't just data points. They were breadcrumbs my daughter left while walking away from our family one midnight session at a time toward a betrayal 3 months in the making. Look at the access times, Russell said, pointing to the screen. The longest sessions are early in the sequence. July through August, 2 hours, 90 minutes, 2.5 hours. She was learning, absorbing. By September, the sessions get shorter. I said, seeing the pattern. 40 minutes, 30 minutes. She knew exactly what she needed. By October, she's down to 20-minute sessions, verification checks. Russell tapped the screen. This is methodical. Whoever taught her this operational discipline knew what they were doing. Nobody taught her, I said. She watched me run corporate espionage countermeasures for 4 decades. She just applied the lessons against her own father. Russell isolated the final entry, October the 13th, 2023, 1:47 a.m. Last session, he said. What did she access? I clicked through the records. Emergency contact database. Soren's complete personnel file. His medical history. His dental records, the ones we'd used to identify, remains we thought were his. Every document that would help someone reconstruct my son's identity with surgical precision. She'd spent 17 minutes reviewing everything one final time. 2 days later, my phone rang at 4:07 a.m. October 13th at 1:47 a.m., Russell said quietly. She checked everything one last time. And on October 15th at 4:07 a.m., my phone rang. 48 hours between final verification and execution. I sat there in the blue server light staring at the screen. My daughter had sat in this building at 2 a.m, methodically stealing pieces of my life's work, photographing documents that would help her build a weapon designed to destroy me. And I'd been 20 minutes away in my waterfront mansion, sleeping. This is admissible evidence, Russell said. Timestamps, access logs, file records. It proves premeditation. It proves my daughter spent 3 months planning how to weaponize my dead son's face against me. Lester, Frances was right. My voice cracked. In her diary, she said Bettina would do something unforgivable just to force me to look at her. This isn't about money, Russell. It's about a daughter who starved for 42 years and finally found a way to make me see her. Russell closed his laptop. Tomorrow morning, Dr. Sinclair will have DNA results. We'll know exactly who Thane Prescott is. I already know who he is, I said, still staring at those 47 glowing timestamps. He's the ghost my daughter built because the living father wasn't paying attention. I left the server room that night carrying the weight of 47 timestamps, 3 months of my daughter's betrayal, documented in glowing blue data. But Frances's words from her diary kept echoing. Bettina did this to make me look at her. Not for money, for attention. 2 days later, when Dr. Verna Sinclair opened the DNA report at exactly 2 p.m. on October 19th, she handed me 2 truths that would shatter and rebuild my world in the same breath. Her office at UTMB Galveston Forensic Pathology Department smelled like antiseptic and paper files. Sterile white walls, medical charts mounted in frames, a single window overlooking the medical center parking lot. Dr. Sinclair, 48 and chief forensic pathologist, sat behind her desk, reviewing her computer screen one final time before turning to face Russell and me. We delivered the hair samples from the guest bathroom comb. Chain of custody pristine, legally obtained, everything by the book so it would hold up in court when this inevitably exploded into criminal charges. The analysis is complete, Dr. Sinclair said, her voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone who delivered terrible news to families for 20 years. Chain of custody is clean. Results are definitive. Just tell me, I said. Is the man in my house my son? She glanced at Russell, then back to me. I need to walk you through both findings. The first is straightforward. The second is not. Something in her voice made my hands grip the armrests. Dr. Sinclair slid the first report across her desk. I picked it up, saw the genetic markers comparison chart, the columns of alleles and probability calculations. The summary sat at the bottom, in bold text. Subject sample shows 0 genetic markers consistent with paternal relation. Probability of biological connection, statistically 0. He's not your son, Dr. Sinclair said quietly. Not distant cousin, not nephew, not any degree of blood relation. Absolute stranger. Russell leaned forward. Absolute confirmation. No margin of error. I knew that the moment he didn't pat my back 3 times, I said. My voice sounded distant in my own ears. But knowing and proving are different animals. The evidence is now irrefutable, Dr. Sinclair said. This will hold up in any court. I set the first report down. You said there were 2 findings. She hesitated. Her hand moved to the second printout on her desk, but didn't lift it immediately. Russell requested cross-reference against national medical databases, she said. Standard protocol for missing persons cases. I flagged your genetic profile and ran it against the Caribbean Medical Network hospitals in the Bahamas, Jamaica, Cayman Islands, Puerto Rico. My pulse accelerated. And I found a hit. She slid the second printout forward. DNA profile registered at Doctors Hospital, Nassau, Bahamas. March of this year. Male, late 30s, trauma admission for head injury and severe burns. Partial amnesia. Listed occupation and maritime worker. Russell grabbed the report before I could move. His eyes scanned the page, then stopped. He looked at me, and his face showed something I'd never seen in 30 years of friendship shock. 99.97% paternal match, he read aloud. Father-son relation confirmed. The words Nassau, Bahamas, March 20, 23, and 99.97% match hit me like a Gulf Coast hurricane, 10 years of grief evaporating in a single sentence. Soren, my voice broke. My son walked into a hospital in Nassau 7 months ago. March 14, 2023, Dr. Sinclair said. Admitted for emergency treatment, severe burns on shoulder and forearm, head trauma consistent with explosion or impact. They kept him for 11 days treated. The burns ran cognitive assessments for the amnesia. Where is he now? I couldn't breathe properly. Where did he go after discharge? The hospital database doesn't track post-discharge movements, she said. But the registration lists his stated residence as Nassau and employment as commercial fishing crew. I stared at both reports lying side by side on her desk. Left page, the imposter in my house was a complete stranger. Zero relation surgical deception confirmed. Right Page, my real son, had walked into a Caribbean hospital 7 months ago. Alive, breathing, existing 1,400 miles away while I mourned a ghost. March 2023. I said trying to process. 7 months ago. What was he doing in Nassau all this time? The registration indicates partial amnesia from head trauma, Dr. Sinclair repeated. It's possible he doesn't fully remember who he is. The burns and head injuries suggest a significant traumatic event, possibly the same boat explosion you believed killed him 10 years ago. Russell was already pulling out his phone. I have contacts in Caribbean maritime networks, hospital administrators, embassy personnel. If he's working fishing vessels out of Nassau, someone will know him. I had mourned my son for a decade, built a shrine to his memory in my mansion. Stared at Galveston Bay every morning, waiting for a miracle I'd convinced myself would never come. And all that time, he was alive, walking Caribbean docks under a different name, maybe not even remembering who he was or where he came from. Lester, Russell said, gripping my shoulder. Your son is alive. We can find him. While I was playing chess with an imposter, I said slowly, my real son was alive, working, breathing, existing. I'll flag this profile as active missing person, Dr. Sinclair said, typing on her computer. If he registers anywhere else in the medical network, clinic, hospital, urgent care, you'll be notified immediately. Russell was already on the phone, pacing Dr. Sinclair's office. I need patient records from Rand Memorial, March 2023. Trauma admission, male, late 30s, possible amnesia case. Yes, this is urgent. Family located after 10 years. I sat there holding both printouts. One hand gripped proof of conspiracy, the other gripped proof of miracle. The imposter in my mansion became secondary. Somewhere in the Caribbean, possibly still using medical facilities, possibly working commercial fishing vessels, with no memory of Harrington Maritime, or Francis or Bettina, or the life he'd lived for 28 years, my real son existed. The question shifted. Not who is the imposter anymore. Now it was, where is Soren, and how do we bring him home before whoever orchestrated this realizes we know? Because the conspiracy wasn't just about stealing my assets anymore. It was about erasing my son from existence while he was still breathing. And whoever orchestrated this, Bettina Lyle, or someone else entirely, they knew Soren was alive and chose to replace him anyway. That meant they either wanted him to stay disappeared, or they were planning something worse. Knowing Soren was alive changed everything. The conspiracy wasn't just theft or fraud, it was erasure. Someone wanted my real son to stay disappeared, forgotten, replaced. And the manufactured duplicate living in my mansion was the instrument of that erasure. 2 days after Dr. Sinclair's revelation, Russell Farrell slid a manila folder across his desk, marked Subject Thane Prescott Complete Identity Reconstruction, and said, "You're not going to like what your daughter spent 2 years building." I opened the file. Thane Prescott, born Houston, 1986, 37 years old. The top page showed a driver's license photo from 2020, a lean face with decent bone structure, similar to Soren, but clearly different. Theater credits listed below, minor productions, commercial work, failed auditions. A resume that screamed struggling actor drowning in a city full of better talent. Failed actor, Russell said. Mounting debt eviction notices, bartending jobs to stay afloat. In August 2021, he was working at a Galveston waterfront dive called The Anchor's Rest. That's where your daughter found him. It found him, I repeated, deliberately. She walked in alone on a Tuesday night, Russell said, pulling out surveillance footage stills. Sat at the bar for 3 hours, talked to him, left him her card. 2 weeks later, she made the first cash payment. I stared at the surveillance image, Bettina in casual clothes leaning across the bar, studying Thane's face like she was evaluating merchandise. What kind of resemblance are we talking about? I asked. Russell pulled out a comparison analysis. 60% natural baseline. Same height, same build, similar bone structure. Close enough to be a starting canvas. But not close enough, I said. Not close enough, Russell confirmed. He spread surgical photographs across the desk in 2 columns. Before and after. The transformation took 18 months, 6 surgical procedures, 3 different doctors. Left column, Thane Prescott in 2021, recognizably similar to Soren, but clearly different. The nose was wrong jaw, too narrow, ears shaped differently. Right column post-surgical photos from 2023. Unnervingly identical. The nose reshaped to match Soren's exactly. Jaw refined, chin altered. Even the ears had been reconstructed. Looking at those before and after photos was like watching someone forge a Rembrandt. The craftsmanship was undeniable, the violation absolute. Medical intake forms from 3 different plastic surgeons in Houston, Russell said, sliding the paperwork forward. All paid cash through shell accounts. No insurance claims, no paper trail except what I dug up through hospital back channels. She turned a 60% resemblance into this. Professional-grade cosmetic reconstruction, Russell said. Cost estimate $250,000 minimum. I touched one of the post-surgical photos. The face staring back could have been Soren's passport photo. The precision was surgical in every sense. Walk me through the timeline, I said. Russell laid out a chronology chart. August 2021. Bettina meets Thane at the Anchor's Rest. September 2021. First cash payment $50,000 down. October 2021. First surgical consultation. Then it's a cascade surgeries recovery periods, more surgeries, more recovery. The timeline stretched across 24 months, 2 full years of planning, execution, refinement. 2 years, I said quietly. She spent 2 years on this. 2 years of surgical appointments, training regimens, behavioral coaching, Russell said. This wasn't impulse, Lester. This was architecture. While I sat in board meetings, approved budgets, trusted my daughter. I couldn't finish the sentence. She was building a weapon, Russell finished for me. My daughter had spent 730 days, 730 separate days sitting across restaurant tables from this actor, teaching him how to be my son, while I sat in my mansion, mourning alone, never suspecting the monster I had created through decades of emotional neglect. There's more, Russell said. He produced another document library withdrawal records from the mansion's private archive. June 2022. Bettina checked out 3 boxes containing Soren's personal journals, years 2010 through 2015. She never returned them. I felt my chest tighten. Soren's journals. Thane studied them for months, Russell said, memorizing speech patterns, favorite phrases, family stories, personal details. Everything Thane knows about being Soren came from words Soren himself wrote. That's Soren's own words, I said. She fed him my son's thoughts, his memories, his voice. Russell slid across vocal coach records. 6 months of training. Thane learned to speak like Soren, breathe like Soren, move like Soren. The coach noted he was exceptionally dedicated to authentic replication because he was being paid to commit the perfect identity theft. Let me see the full cost breakdown, I said. Russell pulled out a financial analysis. Surgical procedures, $250,000. Training and coaching, $75,000. Living expenses for Thane during the transformation, $30,000. Unknown, additional costs for documents, props, research materials. Conservative estimate $500,000 over 24 months. I stared at the numbers. Bettina had executed this with the same ruthless efficiency she brought to corporate mergers. Found the target, evaluated the opportunity, allocated resources, managed the timeline, delivered results. Neither she project manage this like a corporate acquisition, I said. She learned from the best, Lester, Russell said quietly. Unfortunately, I spread the photos out on his desk. Thane before struggling actor with similar features. Thane after surgical duplicate of my missing son. Between those 2 images lay 24 months of calculated preparation, $500,000, and a daughter who'd inherited every strategic instinct I possessed. The cruelest part, I said, isn't the conspiracy itself. It's realizing she learned all of this from me. The patience, the planning, the willingness to spend whatever it takes to achieve the objective. She's your daughter, Russell said. She learned from watching you build an empire. And then she turned those weapons against me. I gathered the photos, the timeline, the surgical records. 2 years of evidence. $500,000 invested in manufacturing a ghost. And somewhere in the Caribbean, my real son was alive, possibly working fishing boats with no memory of his identity, while this manufactured duplicate lived his stolen life 20 minutes from where I slept. But Bettina had made one critical miscalculation. She'd built Thane Prescott to be a puppet. She'd trained him, shaped him, controlled him. What she hadn't counted on was that desperate people who've been handed new identities tend to develop their own survival strategies. And Thane Prescott was about to become far more dangerous to her than he'd ever been to me. Bettina had built Thane Prescott to be her weapon. 2 years, $500,000, surgical transformation, behavioral coaching, every detail controlled. But the daughter who learned ruthless efficiency from me had made one critical miscalculation. Desperate people who've been handed new identities develop their own survival strategies. Russell Farrell arrived at my mansion at dawn with a briefcase full of counter-surveillance equipment, saying we needed to sweep Thane's guest suite before the imposter woke up. If he's building insurance, Russell said, setting up his gear on my kitchen counter, he'd want documentation, recordings, evidence he can trade if this collapses. You think Bettina is monitoring him? I think she invested significantly, Russell said, checking his RF detector. She'd want quality control. Thane had left 20 minutes earlier on his morning run with Anchor, a routine he'd established over the past week. 3 miles along the seawall, back by 7:30. That gave us maybe 40 minutes. Russell moved through the guest suite with methodical precision. RF detectors swept electrical outlets, picture frames, smoke detectors. Thermal scanners checked for heat signatures behind walls. The suite looked pristine, untouched, innocent. Bed made military tight. Clothes folded in drawers, books arranged on the nightstand. If Bettina planted surveillance, Russell murmured, working his way around the room, she'd want audio at minimum, visual if she's thorough. The RF detector stayed silent through the closet, the bathroom, the desk area, nothing. Then it chirped near the nightstand lamp. Russell froze, adjusted the detector sensitivity. The chirp became a steady tone. "It got something," he said. He pulled on latex gloves and carefully unscrewed the lamp base. Inside, wedged against the wiring, sat a miniature recording device, matte black professional grade, smaller than a quarter. Russell photographed it in place with his phone, then extracted it with tweezers and held it under the desk light. "Professional grade," he said, examining the device. "Voice-activated recording, 60-hour battery life, expandable SD storage. This isn't consumer electronics. This is surveillance equipment." Bettina wanted proof he was maintaining the performance, I said. "That's what I thought too," Russell said, "until I checked the serial number." He photographed the device's serial code and ran it through his forensic database on his encrypted laptop. The search took 30 seconds. The result made him go very still. "Oh, what?" I asked. "Purchase record August 2023, Houston Electronics Supplier, cash payment." He turned the laptop so I could see the screen. "Purchased by Thane Prescott." The serial number database pinged back with a name that made me rethink everything. Thane Prescott, purchaser, August 2023. The puppet had been pulling his own strings all along. "He's recording himself," I said slowly. "Why would the imposter document his own deception?" "Insurance," Russell said. "He knows if this goes south, Bettina will throw him under the bus. He's building a lifeboat." Russell started searching the room with new eyes, not looking for devices Bettina planted, looking for where Thane would hide backup evidence. He found them in the nightstand's bottom drawer, 3 SD cards tucked inside a hollowed-out copy of Moby Dick. Russell held them up to the light like they were diamonds. 3 months of recordings, he said. August, September, October, everything since he moved into this suite. We returned to Russell's office. He loaded the SD cards into his laptop, pulled up audio files organized by date, hundreds of recordings. He clicked a file from August 23rd. Bettina's voice filled the room, crystal clear, professional audio quality. When you're at the office, don't use the phrase operational efficiency. Soren never talked like that. Say it feels right instead. Thane's voice responding, "It feels right. Got it." And when Dad asks about the boat explosion, you pause for exactly 2 seconds before answering, like you're accessing difficult memories. Don't overdo it. 2 seconds, pause, then answer. Russell skipped forward. September 15th, Lyle's voice joining the conversation. "The estate amendment needs his signature by November 1st, Lyle said. "After that, the distribution triggers automatically. 60% to Soren, that's you 40%, remains with Bettina as co-trustee. Patrick can contest it, but by then, the paperwork is filed." "What if he doesn't believe me?" Thane asked. "He already believes you," Bettina said. "We just need to maintain consistency until November 1st. Then it doesn't matter." Russell stopped the playback. He recorded everything I said, every coaching session, every strategy meeting, every incriminating word. "Not just audio," Russell said, pulling up his financial tracking software. "Look at this." Bank records filled the screen. Wells Fargo Market Street branch. Safety deposit box rental agreement. Renter name, Thane Prescott. Date open September 15th, 2023. Access logs monthly visits most recent October 20th. He has a safety deposit box, Russell said. Opened it the same day Lyle made that recording about the estate amendment, and he's been updating it monthly. What's in the box? Everything he needs to trade up when the walls start closing in, Russell said. Surgical records showing before and after transformation, payment receipts from Bettina's shell accounts, complete audio archive of coaching sessions, full cooperation package ready to go. You know what's more dangerous than a desperate man with nothing to lose? A desperate man who's smart enough to document everything and patient enough to wait for the perfect moment to deploy his insurance policy. He's been playing survival chess since day one, I said. While Bettina thought she controlled him, he was building his exit strategy. Professional actor learns a role, Russell said, but a smart survivor makes sure he's got leverage before the curtain falls. Thane knows exactly what he is, an expendable asset. So he did what any intelligent con artist would do. He documented the conspiracy, positioned himself as the most valuable cooperating witness federal prosecutors could ever want, and waited. I looked at Russell's screen showing months of access logs to that safety deposit box. What happens when he decides to deploy his insurance? It depends on who gets to him first, Russell said. Us, Bettina, or the FBI. The man sleeping in my guest suite wasn't a pawn. He was a third player at the table with his own game in motion. And his next move was coming. Thane's safety deposit box meant he was playing survival chess building leverage for when the collapse came. But his move would have to wait. Because 2 days after Russell found those recordings, when Bettina and Lyle arrived at my study at precisely 2 p.m., with a leather portfolio marked Estate Amendment Proposal, I knew the endgame had officially begun. Bettina entered in full CFO mode, tailored charcoal suit, hair pulled back. Severe presentation materials, organized with the precision she brought to quarterly earnings reports. Lyle followed, carrying the portfolio, his attorney demeanor impeccable. They moved through my study like executives conducting a merger pitch. Dad, Bettina said, setting down her tablet on my desk. Now that Soren is back, we need to update the estate documents and shareholder provisions. It's only right. The legal framework needs to officially reinstate his status. Lyle added, opening the portfolio. Standard succession planning. We've prepared comprehensive amendments. I gestured to the chairs across from my desk. Of course. Let me see what you've prepared. Lyle spread documents across my desk with the practiced efficiency of a Manhattan corporate attorney. 42 pages. I counted as he laid them out. 42 pages of legal precision, every paragraph professionally formatted, every clause cross-referenced. This represents a complete structural update. Lyle said, his finger tracing the first page's executive summary. Page 7 outlines the voting share reinstatement. Page 12 updates the trust distribution triggers. Page 19 handles tax optimization strategies. I picked up page 7. Dense legal language describing how Soren Harrington's voting rights would be immediately restored upon signature. 28% of company voting shares returning to his control. Page 12 detailed trust distribution mechanisms. Automatic triggers based on signature date. Beneficiary updates. Co-trustee provisions naming Bettina as secondary fiduciary. Page 19 mapped tax implications with surgical precision, minimizing gift tax exposure, optimizing estate distribution, protecting against IRS challenges. We've thought through every detail, Dad, Bettina said, watching my face. Soren deserves his rightful place restored. This is, I paused, scanning the clauses. Extraordinarily thorough work, Lyle. Let me tell you what separates good attorneys from great ones. Good attorneys cover the obvious angles. Great attorneys anticipate angles you didn't know existed. And Lyle Thornton was operating at a level that would have impressed the top Manhattan firms. Every contingency addressed, every loophole closed, every potential challenge preemptively countered. If I hadn't known the truth, if I genuinely believed the man upstairs was my son, this would look like perfectly reasonable estate planning from a daughter who wanted to do right by her returned brother. But I did know the truth, which meant these 42 pages weren't estate planning. They were a masterpiece of legal theft. Page 28 is particularly important. Lyle continued flipping to a flag section. It establishes the timeline for distribution activation, Upon execution, the amendments take immediate effect. Within 90 days, all voting share transfers complete automatically. Then 90 days, I repeated. A standard processing window for corporate share transfers, Lyle said smoothly. SEC compliance requirements, shareholder notification periods. All by the book. Bettina leaned forward. We want everything proper, Dad. No shortcuts, just family taking care of family. Lyle produced an expensive fountain pen from his briefcase. Mont Blanc black lacquer probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He placed it beside 3 signature pages he'd separated from the stack. If you're comfortable, he said, we can execute today. I've arranged for mobile notarization this afternoon. They can be here within 2 hours. 42 pages distilled to 3 signature blocks. Simple, clean, irreversible. Bettina's eyes never left my face, watching for hesitation, for doubt, for any sign I suspected what they'd built. I set down the documents and met her gaze. This is my life's work on these pages. 40 years of building Harrington Maritime. I need time to review every clause personally. Of course, Dad, Bettina said immediately. No push, no pressure, perfect patience. Take whatever time you need. We just want everything proper for Soren. A week, I said. Let me read through everything, consult with my own counsel, make sure I understand all implications. Absolutely, Lyle said, gathering the documents back into the portfolio. This is too important to rush. We'll follow up early next week. They stood, professional handshakes, reassuring smiles. Bettina kissed my cheek on her way out, something she hadn't done in 6 months. I walked them to the front door, watched their Mercedes pull down the oak-lined driveway, waited until their taillights disappeared around the curve. Then I returned to my study and stood at the window for 5 full minutes, staring at nothing. Standing at that window watching their car disappear, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 40 years of corporate warfare. The calm certainty that comes from knowing you're not reacting to your opponent's move. You predicted it 2 months ago and already built the countertrap. 42 pages. Lyle had spent months drafting this. Every clause designed to transfer control the moment I signed. If I hadn't known the truth, this would have worked perfectly. But I'd known for 3 weeks, which meant I'd had 3 weeks to prepare. I picked up my encrypted phone and dialed Elmer Delaney's direct line. He answered on the first ring. Elmer, I said, they just presented the estate amendment, exactly as we anticipated. It's 40-some pages of legal work. Elmer's voice carried grim satisfaction. Lyle's specialty. 42 pages, I confirmed. Masterful architecture. If I'd signed it, they'd control everything within 90 days. How long before they push for signature? Days, maybe a week. But I've arranged everything. I need you present on December 15th. Full board assembly, annual shareholders meeting. In the irrevocable trust, Elmer said. I executed October 1st. I confirmed. 2 weeks before Thane ever appeared. Your sole trustee. 51% controlling shares. Untouchable by family members. And December 15th is when we reveal it. Along with DNA evidence, Thane's recorded confessions, Russell's forensic documentation, and one more piece Bettina doesn't know about. What's that? My real son walking through the boardroom doors while the imposter sits next to my daughter. Elmer went quiet for 3 seconds. You found Soren. Russell tracked him to Nassau. We're bringing him home. He arrives December 14th. Jesus, Lester. December 15th isn't just the annual meeting, Elmer. It's the day everything collapses. The trap I set 2 months ago finally springs. I hung up and looked at Lyle's 42 pages spread across my desk. The weapon they thought would destroy me, now destined to become evidence in their own prosecution. Bettina and Lyle thought they were racing toward a finish line. They had no idea I'd moved it 3 months ago. December 15th was set. The trap was armed. Elmer would reveal the trust. DNA evidence would expose Thane. Russell's recordings would document the conspiracy. And my real son would walk through boardroom doors while the imposter sat next to my daughter. But first I needed to confirm the foundation was solid. On October 27th, I drove to Houston to review the legal document I'd executed on October 1st, 2 weeks before the phone call that would change everything, proof that I'd seen this conspiracy coming long before my daughter knew I was watching. I kept the appointment secret, didn't tell Bettina, didn't log it in my calendar, paid the consultation fee in cash. 60 miles from Galveston to downtown Houston, giving me time to think about timing, about how small details accumulate into patterns about how Zelda had mentioned in late September that Bettina was printing estate balance sheets at 11 p.m. in locked offices. That had been enough. One late-night printing session, one deviation from normal behavior, enough to make me act. Thornton and Associates occupied the 42nd floor of a glass tower overlooking Houston's financial district, elite estate planning firm, the kind of practice that handled billion-dollar trusts and never advertised because their clients came through referrals whispered in the country club dining rooms. The receptionist recognized me immediately. "Mr. Harrington," she said. "Mr. Caldwell is expecting you. Conference room 3. Attorney Raymond Caldwell, senior partner at Thornton and Associates and one of Houston's most discreet estate planners, stood when I entered. 61 years old, silver-hair tailored suit that cost more than most people's cars. He drafted the irrevocable trust that would checkmate my daughter's conspiracy before she even deployed it. "Mr. Harrington," he said, shaking my hand. "Good to see you again. The trust documents you requested to review are ready." I took the seat across from him. "I need to understand every clause, Raymond. My daughter just presented her own estate amendment proposal." His eyebrows rose slightly. "Then this meeting is perfectly timed." He spread the documents across the polished conference table. 73 pages. Substantially more complex than Lyle's 42-page attempt. "Let's walk through the architecture," Caldwell said, his finger tracing the executive summary. 51% of Galveston Maritime Holdings voting shares, transferred to irrevocable trust structure. Elmer Delaney designated as sole independent trustee with absolute discretion. I picked up page 12, the trustee provisions. Elmer's powers were comprehensive vote shares, approve corporate actions, execute contracts. No family member could override his decisions. "Walk me through the family access restrictions again," I said. Caldwell flipped to section 4. Zero access until all corporate disputes, inheritance challenges, and legal actions are resolved. The trust operates as a legal wall. Your children cannot touch these shares, cannot vote them, cannot transfer them, cannot even contest the trust's existence while corporate litigation is pending or threatened. And pending includes anticipated litigation. Correct. If I file a sworn affidavit stating that litigation is reasonably anticipated based on current circumstances, the trust remains locked. Elmer maintains sole control. October 1st, the date hit the room like a thunderclap when Caldwell spoke it aloud, and I watched him realize what it meant. I hadn't reacted to my daughter's conspiracy, I'd predicted it, and built the counter-trap 2 weeks early. "Read the execution date for me," I said, out loud for the record. Caldwell pulled the signature page forward. Execution date October 1st, 2023. Notarized by Sarah Mitchell, witnessed by Thomas Bradford and Jennifer Holmes, filed with Harris County Clerk's Office October 2nd. October 1st, I repeated. 15 days before the phone call that supposedly brought my son home. Caldwell set down the document. "You anticipated their move before they made it. The trust was already active when the imposter appeared." "I saw the pattern," I said. Bettina accessing files after hours, Lyle asking casual questions about estate structure during family dinners, the way they looked at each other when I mentioned updating my will. Small tells, but enough. Before I reveal the execution date that changes everything the moment Caldwell reads it aloud, comment, A, if you think I saw this coming, or B, if you think I got lucky. Add one reason in 5 to 10 words. Please note, some details ahead are recreated for narrative impact, but the strategic lesson is what matters. "Now walk me through what happens if someone tries to modify the estate," I said. Caldwell turned to section 7. "Any attempt to modify estate distributions, shareholder agreements, or corporate governance while the trust is active automatically triggers dispute resolution protocols. The trust agreement specifically states that subsequent estate instruments are void if they conflict with trustee authority. So even if I had signed Lyle's amendment, it would be legally void the moment it was filed," Caldwell confirmed. "The trust supersedes all subsequent estate instruments. You could sign 100 amendments. None would have legal effect while the trust controls the controlling interest." Watching Caldwell confirm the trust was airtight, felt like standing on a ship's bridge during a hurricane, knowing your vessel was built strong enough to weather anything the storm could throw, because you'd anticipated the storm months before the first cloud appeared. "That Lyle spent months drafting his proposal," I said. 42 pages of legal architecture. "Wasted effort," Caldwell said. The moment those shares entered the trust on October 1st, any subsequent estate modification became legally meaningless. I leaned back in my chair. Final question: can this trust be challenged? Contested, broken. Caldwell's answer was immediate and definitive. Irrevocable means exactly that, Mr. Harrington. 3 independent counsel reviewed this structure. Texas trust law provides fortress-level protection for properly executed irrevocable trusts. Your daughter could hire every estate attorney in Houston, and they'd all tell her the same thing: this trust cannot be broken, modified, or circumvented. Then my daughter has been working toward a finish line that no longer exists. Since October 1st, Caldwell confirmed. Yes, I gathered the 73 pages feeling their weight. Legal certainty. Proof that on October 1st, I'd moved the entire prize beyond my daughter's reach before she ever sent Thane to my harbor gate. Bettina had spent 2 years invested substantially and recruited a desperate actor to claim assets that legally disappeared 14 days before he appeared. She thought she was executing the perfect crime. She had no idea she was performing elaborate theater for an audience of one who'd already written the ending. December 15th. I said standing. That's when we reveal it. The shareholders meeting, Caldwell said. I'll have certified copies prepared for board distribution. I shook his hand and left that Houston office holding the legal fortress that would end my daughter's conspiracy with a single document filed 26 days before she thought the game began. I returned from Houston that afternoon, carrying 73 pages of legal certainty. Bettina had performed elaborate theater for an audience who'd written the ending before the curtain rose. The trust was airtight. The conspiracy was dead. All that remained was the revelation. But at 11:17 p.m. on October 29th, 3 sharp knocks echoed from my study door. Deliberate measured the sound of a man who had made a decision and was ready to face the consequences. I looked up from Lyle's estate documents spread across my desk. I knew before opening the door who it would be. Thane Prescott stood in the hallway, still dressed in the clothes he'd worn to dinner, khakis button-down shirt, but disheveled now. His eyes carried the exhaustion of a man who'd been running survival calculations for weeks and finally reached an endpoint. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Just the 2 of us." I gestured him inside. "Come in, close the door." He stepped into my study and shut the door with a quiet click. Stood there for a moment, hands at his sides, no longer carrying Soren's posture. Just himself. "You know I'm not your son," he said. No preamble, no performance. "And I know you know. We've both been playing the same game for 2 weeks. I leaned back in my chair. "Sit down." "I'd rather stand." "Sit down," I repeated. "If we're going to do this, we do it like adults." He sat in the leather chair across from my desk, the same chair Bettina had occupied 3 days ago when she presented her estate amendment. "How long have you known?" he asked. 5 seconds after you hugged me at Harbor Gate 7. 3 missing back pats. Soren did it every time since age 7. You held perfectly still." Thane nodded slowly. "The coaching materials didn't mention that." They wouldn't have. It wasn't something Bettina knew about. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a small USB drive, and slid it across my mahogany desk. The plastic made a soft scraping sound against the wood. "Complete audio logs," he said. 3 months, Bettina Lyle, surgical consultations, payment schedules, training sessions, everything. I picked up the drive, smaller than my thumb, containing evidence that could send my daughter to federal prison. "Why are you giving this to me?" I asked. "Because I want out, but they won't let me walk away alive. I need protection, and you need evidence." He met my eyes. "I'm offering full cooperation, federal testimony, whatever you need. In exchange for a cooperation agreement, reduced charges, or whatever legal safety your attorneys can arrange. You know what's stranger than having a con artist confess his crimes to you at midnight, realizing he's the most honest person who's been in your house for the past 2 weeks?" I stood, walked to the bar cart, poured 2 glasses of whiskey. Balvenie, 21 years old. I handed one to Thane in acknowledgement that this conversation operated outside normal rules. "Tell me everything from the beginning," I said. He took a sip, swallowed, set the glass down carefully. "August 2021, he began. "I was bartending at the Anchor's Rest, failing actor mounting debt 3 months behind on rent. Your daughter walked in alone around 9 p.m., ordered bourbon, and stared at me for 20 minutes straight. Just stared, like she'd seen a ghost. Finally, she asked if I'd ever considered cosmetic work. I thought she was propositioning me. Then she showed me a photograph of your son and a surgical plan side by side. I sipped my whiskey. The burn felt appropriate. She said I had a face worth $500,000, Thane continued. I thought she was crazy. Then she showed me the surgical plan, the payment schedule, the training timeline. 2 years of transformation in exchange for enough money to change my life. And you said yes. I was 3 weeks from eviction, surviving on ramen and audition rejection letters. She was offering me more money than I'd earned in 10 years of bartending. He looked at his hands. I said yes before I understood what I was agreeing to. 6 surgeries, I said. 6 surgeries, he confirmed. Nose jaw, ears chin, each one followed by weeks of recovery swelling pain, then voice coaching, behavioral training, memorizing your son's journals. She gave me 3 boxes of them. I studied those notebooks for months, learned his favorite phrases, his speech patterns, his childhood stories. You became him better than you'd ever been yourself. Thane nodded. By the time the final surgery healed, I didn't recognize my own face anymore. I'd transformed into someone else completely. Sitting across from a man who'd surgically transformed himself into my son, listening to him, ask why my daughter would orchestrate such elaborate destruction, I finally understood what Francis had been trying to tell me. For 38 years, I was a brilliant strategist and a catastrophic father. But there's one thing I never understood, Thane said. One thing she never explained in all those training sessions, all those months of preparation. What's that? Now why? He leaned forward. Why did she do this? You're her father. She's CFO of your company. She has position, wealth, respect. Why burn it all down? Why risk federal prison? Why spend 2 years and $500,000 on this elaborate deception? I sat in silence for a long moment. Thane's question hung in the air between us. I thought of Francis's diary, the final entry warning me about Bettina's starvation for recognition. I thought of 40 years building an empire, while my daughter watched from the sidelines, brilliant and overlooked. The answer wasn't complex. It was devastatingly simple. She didn't do it for money, Thane, I said quietly. She did it so I would finally look at her. That's it. His voice carried genuine disbelief. That's the whole reason? No, I met his eyes. The whole reason is that I taught her how to be ruthless, how to execute the perfect strategy, how to plan 3 moves ahead, and then I never once looked her in the eye and told her I was proud of her. Thane stared at me. All this, the surgeries, the training, the elaborate deception, just so you'd pay attention to her. I nodded, unable to speak, because the truth was worse than that. Bettina hadn't just orchestrated a perfect crime, she'd built a mirror that forced me to see exactly who I was, a man who could read corporate balance sheets with surgical precision, but couldn't see his own daughter starving for recognition 20 feet away. Jesus, Thane whispered. Yeah, I said. We sat in silence, 2 men on opposite sides of a conspiracy united by the understanding that we were both victims of the same blindness. On November 1st, Russell Farrell called me at 7 a.m. and said 6 words that shifted my entire understanding of who was really destroying my family. Lyle's been stealing for 14 months. I was standing in my kitchen, coffee halfway to my lips, when the words hit me like a physical blow. What did you say? Your son-in-law has been embezzling from Harrington Maritime since September 2022. Russell said, voice tight with controlled fury. 18 wire transfers totaling $18.3 million. Every single one structured to stay below federal reporting thresholds, $900,000 here, $1.1 million there. He's been running it through a shell company called Reed Maritime Consulting LLC, registered in the Cayman Islands. I set the coffee cup down before I dropped it. And how did we miss this? Because Lyle's the CFO, Russell said. He controls the accounting systems. He buried the transfers in legitimate operational expenses, port fees, equipment leases, insurance premiums. Each payment looked clean on the surface. It took me 3 weeks of forensic analysis to trace the pattern. I sat down hard at the kitchen table. It had $18.3 million, I repeated, over 14 months. September 2022 through October 2023. Russell confirmed. That's 5 months before Bettina found Thane in that Jacksonville halfway house. Lyle started stealing half a year before his wife launched the imposter conspiracy. The implications crashed over me in waves. They weren't working together, I said slowly. Lyle was running his own exit strategy. That's what it looks like, Russell agreed. Bettina's building an empire play, replace your dead son, control the trust, take over the company. But Lyle, he's liquidating. He's been moving $18.3 million into an offshore account, while his wife builds a fraud that requires Thane to stay in place for decades. Those are opposite strategies. I pressed my hands flat against the table to steady myself. When did they get married? I asked. Ikende, June 2019, Russell said. 4 years ago. I did the math in my head. Soren's letter, the one he'd sent from that fishing boat in 2018, the one that never reached me, had been intercepted in August 2018. Lyle married Bettina 10 months later. He intercepted Soren's letter in 2018. I said, married Bettina in 2019, started embezzling in 2022. He's been positioning himself inside this family for 7 years. And now he's cashing out, Russell said. The last transfer went through on October 27th, $1.03 million, 4 days before I caught the pattern. I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. This wasn't just betrayal, this was calculated methodical theft, executed by a man I'd welcomed into my family, given a C-suite position trusted with my company's finances. How do you measure the damage when the person you hired to protect your wealth spent 7 years systematically destroying it from the inside? Does Bettina know? I asked. I don't think so, Russell said. If she knew Lyle was stealing, she'd have stopped him. His embezzlement threatens the whole conspiracy. If the company goes bankrupt before the trust executes, there's nothing for her to control. She needs Harrington Maritime intact. But Lyle doesn't, I said. He just needs his $18.3 million and a flight to somewhere without extradition. Exactly, Russell said. I pulled his passport records. He's been to Grand Cayman 4 times in the last 14 months, always for banking conferences. Each trip was within 48 hours of a major transfer. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside the Houston skyline was waking up traffic building lights coming on, in office towers, people starting their ordinary days. And I was standing here learning that my daughter-in-law's husband had stolen $18.3 million while she orchestrated a surgical conspiracy to replace my dead son. 2 betrayals running in parallel, 2 separate plans to destroy everything I'd built. What's our next move? I asked. I've already contacted the FBI, Russell said. Special Agent Victoria Chen is opening a federal investigation into wire fraud and money laundering. With the evidence I've compiled, they can freeze Lyle's offshore accounts and issue an arrest warrant within 72 hours. I turned away from the window. Not yet, I said. Don't arrest him yet. Russell was silent for a moment. Why? Because if we arrest Lyle now, Bettina will know we're onto the family. She'll disappear. Thane will disappear. We'll lose our chance at the December 15th confrontation. So we let Lyle stay free for 6 more weeks, Russell asked carefully. We let the FBI build an airtight case, I said. We document everything. And on December 15th, when Bettina sits in that boardroom, thinking she's about to execute the trust and take control of my company, we hit her with all of it at once. The imposter, the fraud, the conspiracy. And then while she's processing that, the FBI walks in and arrests her husband for stealing $18.3 million. Maximum impact, Russell said quietly. Maximum justice, I corrected. We talked for another 20 minutes about evidence protocols, FBI coordination, asset freezes. By the time I hung up, my coffee was cold and my hands were shaking. Lyle had married Bettina in 2019, 1 year after intercepting the letter that could have brought my real son home. He'd spent 7 years working his way into my company, my family, my trust. And then, in September 2022, while his wife prepared to launch the most audacious fraud I'd ever seen, he'd started quietly stealing pieces of my empire and hiding them in offshore accounts, building his own escape route. 2 conspiracies, 2 betrayals, 1 family. And in 2 weeks on December 15th, she would sit in that boardroom thinking her husband stood beside her, with no idea the FBI had already built a federal case that would send him to prison for 2 decades. The call from Captain Osborne came at 7:43 on a Friday morning, 48 hours after the FBI had opened their investigation into my son-in-law's embezzlement. I was in Russell's office reviewing wire transfer documentation when his computer chimed with an incoming video call from a Barbados area code. That's him, Russell said, clicking accept. The screen filled with the weathered face of a man in his mid-50s, skin darkened by decades of Caribbean sun, standing on a commercial dock with cargo containers stacked behind him. "Mr. Harrington," the man said, voice carrying the musical lilt of island English. "I'm Captain Nigel Osborne. I run freight routes between Nassau and Galveston, 43 years in Caribbean shipping. Your attorney asked me to keep eyes open for a man named Soren Harrington working maritime." My throat tightened. "You found him?" "I found him 3 days ago in Nassau," Captain Osborne said. "Working deck crew on the MV Pelican Run under the name Ben Carroll. Been with that ship 18 months. I showed the first mate your son's photograph. He's older, now thinner scar on his left hand from a winch accident, but it's him, Mr. Harrington. It's your son." I gripped Russell's desk to steady myself. "Where is he now?" Russell asked. "Pelican Run's en route to Galveston," Captain Osborne said. "Left Nassau yesterday with container cargo. 7-day crossing should dock November 18th, maybe 20th, if weather slows them." I radioed the captain, told him, "There's a man in Texas looking for Ben Carroll family business." Captain agreed to make sure Ben stays aboard until you can meet the ship. "Did he look well?" My voice cracked. Captain Osborne's expression softened. "He looked like a man who's been running from something for a long time, Mr. Harrington. Thin, quiet, keeps to himself. But he's healthy. He's alive. And in 2 weeks, he'll be standing on a Galveston dock waiting for you." The call ended with Russell arranging payment and coordination. I sat afterward staring at the blank screen, trying to process that my son, the son I'd believed was gone forever, was alive working under an assumed name and would be home in 2 weeks. Later that afternoon, alone in my office at Harrington Maritime, I pulled out the photograph I kept in my desk drawer. Soren at 20, standing on our marina dock, holding a halyard rope with easy competence. Captain Osborne had described the way Ben Carroll handled cargo lines in Nassau, the same efficient movements my son had learned as a teenager. I stared at the photograph, feeling relief collide with 18 months of grief I'd believed was permanent. Somewhere in the Atlantic, Soren was sailing toward Galveston, and somewhere in this city, Bettina was planning her December 15th trust execution, believing her brother was lost forever. How was I supposed to tell her Soren was alive without revealing that Thane had known the truth all along? 2 days later, on Sunday, November 5th, I met Senator Philip Whitfield for lunch at the Galveston Country Club. Whitfield was 63, a 3-term independent from Louisiana, who'd spent 30 years navigating Austin politics with the precision of a chess master. He'd called Friday afternoon, asking for an urgent meeting about legislative developments affecting Harrington Maritime. We sat overlooking the golf course. Whitfield slid a manila folder across the tablecloth before I'd even ordered. "Clause 47. B," he said. "Amendment to Texas Maritime Commerce Bill introduced 3 weeks ago. Creates a regulatory loophole that would devalue AI-driven maritime patents by 60 to 70%. I opened the folder. Pages of highlighted legislative text, technical language about patent classifications. "I don't understand," I said. "Why would—" "Your son-in-law lobbied 3 Commerce Committee members to support it," Whitfield interrupted quietly. "Used the Harrington name, presented himself as representing your company's interests. Told them you believed AI maritime patents were overvalued and needed market correction." The grilled redfish the waiter had delivered went forgotten. "Yes, Lyle did this," Whitfield confirmed. "Amendment scheduled for floor vote, November 29th. If it passes, your Harbor Eye patent loses $47 million in valuation overnight. Becomes worth maybe $15 million at most." I set down my fork, understanding crystallizing with cold clarity. "He's not just embezzling," I said. "He's destroying the company's value before he runs." "That's what it looks like," Whitfield said. "Hollow out the cash through theft crater, the patent value through legislation, leave Harrington Maritime as a shell. I'm guessing he's planning to disappear before anyone realizes what he's done. Can you stop the amendment?" "I'm already mobilizing opposition," Whitfield said, "but I need you to testify publicly. The committee needs to hear directly from you that Lyle was acting without authorization. Your testimony kills the amendment, Lester. You're the victim here, not the villain." I sat in my car in the country club parking lot afterward, hands on the steering wheel, watching Senator Whitfield's black Lincoln pull away. 3 deadlines converging November 18th to 20th when Soren would arrive. November 29th, when Clause 47B would come to a vote. December 15th, when the trust executed and Bettina believed she'd secure control of everything. 34 years ago, I taught 8-year-old Bettina to read shipping manifests in this same parking lot, showing her how to understand the maritime business that would someday be part of her inheritance. Now, her husband was systematically destroying that inheritance while her co-conspirator prepared to steal it outright. Russell was waiting in my office when I returned at 4 p.m. "I found something," he said, sliding a document across my desk. "Lyle's marriage license application from 2016. I looked at the form. Standard Texas marriage license, Lyle's information in careful handwriting. But there was a notation in the margin named change documentation, Carson to Thornton, filed Harris County, June 2016. "Carson," I said. "I ran the name," Russell said quietly. Gerald Carson owned Carson Maritime Services, a Houston shipping firm. Competed directly with Harrington Maritime for Gulf Coast contracts through the 2000s. In 2009, you acquired their primary client base. Carson Maritime went bankrupt 6 months later. Gerald Carson lost everything: his business, his house, his retirement. He died in 2019. I stared at the marriage license, understanding shifting like tectonic plates. "Lyle is Gerald Carson's son," I said. Russell nodded. "He changed his surname 6 months before he met Bettina, 7 years ago. Everything since then, the courtship, the marriage, the CFO position, the embezzlement, the legislative sabotage. It wasn't opportunistic theft, Lester. It was revenge his father designed before he died. My son-in-law wasn't an ambitious man who'd exploited a vulnerable family. He was Gerald Carson's son, and he'd spent 7 years executing vengeance for a father who'd lost everything to Harrington Maritime's business practices. And I had no idea whether Bettina had been specifically targeted or simply a convenient opportunity that had presented itself to a man determined to destroy me. The silhouette stepping off Captain Osborne's vessel at 5:45 that November morning carried my son's shoulders, but 10 years had carved a stranger's posture into the frame. I stood on the private pier south of Galveston Island, Russell beside me, watching Soren Harrington, 38 years old, now weathered by a decade of Caribbean freight routes, navigate the gangway with the careful movements of someone who'd learned not to trust solid ground. He wore a faded work shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and even from 20 feet away, I could see the massive burn scar running from his left shoulder to his forearm, jagged purple-pink tissue that caught the dawn light like a topographical map of survival. Captain Osborne followed him down the gangway, carrying a single duffel bag. "He worked my cruise for 8 months before I knew who he was," Captain Osborne said quietly to Russell, passing him the bag. "Solid sailor. Whatever happened to him made him careful." Soren stopped 3 feet from me, didn't embrace, nodded. "Dad," he said. His voice was rougher than I remembered, abraded by salt air and silence. "Soren," I managed. We stood there in the pre-dawn gray, 2 men connected by blood and separated by 10 years of manufactured grief, neither of us knowing how to bridge the distance. "I can't go to the house," Soren said finally. "Not yet. Russell said there's someone living my life." "Yes," I said. "My garage has a side entrance," Russell interjected. "No one will see you there." Soren nodded again, shoulders tight, and turned toward Russell's car. Captain Osborne shook my hand before departing. "He's been through something terrible, Mr. Harrington. Whatever you're planning to do with the people who tried to replace him, make it count." Russell drove us through empty Galveston streets as dawn broke over the Gulf. I sat in the back seat beside my son, close enough to touch, but paralyzed by the weight of everything I needed to tell him: the imposter conspiracy, Bettina's marriage to Gerald Carson's son, the embezzlement, the legislative sabotage, the December 15th deadline. My hands trembled against my knees. Somewhere in Houston, Thane was probably waking up in the guest house, preparing for another day of pretending to be the man sitting beside me. And I was going to have to tell Soren that Thane existed, that there was a surgically altered stranger, wearing his face, living in his childhood home, accepted by his sister as family. How was I supposed to explain that the grandson who carried Soren's genes called another man Dad? Russell's garage was a converted warehouse near the port, secure and private. He parked inside, locked the bay door, and led us to a back office with a couch, a desk, and fluorescent lights that hummed in the silence. Soren sat on the couch. I sat across from him in Russell's desk chair. Russell stood by the door, witness to a reunion 10 years overdue. "Show me," I said quietly. Soren understood. He rolled up his left sleeve, slowly revealing the full extent of the burn scar. It started at his shoulder, jagged and deep, running down his bicep and forearm, in waves of healed tissue that looked like melted wax frozen mid-flow. The kind of injury that should have killed him. I reached out, touched the scar with my fingertips. Words failed. The explosion took everything, Soren said, voice flat with the exhaustion of carrying this story alone for 10 years. I woke up in a Nassau clinic 3 weeks later with a name I didn't recognize, and burns, they said, should have killed me. No memory, no identification, no way to prove who I was. The clinic staff called me Ben Carroll, because that's what was written on the work shirt I was wearing when fishermen pulled me from the water. 3 weeks, I whispered. 3 weeks unconscious, Soren confirmed. When I finally woke up, I knew I was someone. I just didn't know who. Fragments came back slowly over the years, images of boats' faces. I couldn't name a house by the water, but nothing concrete enough to find my way home. How did you remember? Russell asked. 6 months ago, I was unloading cargo in Port-au-Prince, Soren said. A shipping manifest came through for Harrington Maritime. The name hit me like a physical blow. I knew that name meant something. I started asking questions, searching records, piecing together fragments. Found old news articles about a Houston Maritime family. Found photographs that looked like the faces in my memory. And I knew. He looked at me directly for the first time since stepping off Captain Osborne's vessel. I tried to find my way back, Dad. I'm sorry I couldn't do it faster. I shook my head, throat too tight to speak. This wasn't his fault. None of this was his fault. I'm sorry, I said finally. Everything happening now, the imposter, your sister's marriage, the company, it's because I failed both of you. Tell me about the imposter, Soren said. So I told him. Everything. The October 15th phone call from Bettina saying she'd found him in a Jacksonville halfway house. The immediate certainty that something was wrong, Russell's investigation, the surgical records, Dr. Edmund Reyes, and the $500,000 transformation. Thane's real identity, the trust execution deadline, Bettina's complicity, Lyle's embezzlement, and his Carson family revenge conspiracy. The Clause 47B legislative sabotage. 2 hours of information compressed into brutal factual sentences. Soren sat motionless through it all, processing a decade's worth of family betrayal in a single morning. When I finished, silence filled Russell's garage like water flooding a compartment. Then Soren asked the question that broke the moment. Does Bettina know? His voice was careful, controlled. Does my sister know I'm alive? I could have lied. Could have protected him from this final betrayal for a few more hours. But he deserved the truth. She found out October 15th. I said quietly. Russell told her the same day we discovered Thane was an imposter. She knows you're alive. She knows where you are. And she chose to protect Thane's identity anyway. The color drained from Soren's face. She knew for a month, his voice cracked. She knew I was alive, and she chose him. The burn scar seemed to pulse in the fluorescent light. Physical proof of 10 years of suffering, his sister had decided, didn't matter as much as protecting the man who'd stolen his identity. I said. Soren stood abruptly, walked to the far corner of the garage, and pressed his forehead against the concrete wall. His shoulders shook once, twice, then went rigid with control, and I understood that the explosion 10 years ago hadn't just stolen my son's memory. It had given my daughter permission to forget he'd ever existed. Soren spent the 26 days between November 18th and December 14th in Russell's garage processing a decade of stolen identity while we built the case that would destroy the people who'd tried to replace him. Now, Russell's hand on my shoulder at 11:38 kept me seated in the terminal alcove 30 yards from gate D12, where my son-in-law would arrive in 9 minutes carrying $2 million and a passport that said his name was Daniel Reeve. Holloway and Drummond are positioned behind the jetway service door, Russell whispered. Briefcase has false bottom, $2 million in hundreds. Canadian passport under Daniel Reeve cleared customs flagging an hour ago. He's committed. I watched the gate area through the alcove's tinted glass partition. Qatar Airways flight 778 to Doha was scheduled to depart at 11:55. From Doha, Daniel Reeve could disappear into a dozen countries without extradition treaties. Lyle had planned this exit for years, the offshore accounts, the shell companies, the fake identity. All he had to do was board. There, Russell said quietly. Lyle Thornton appeared at the far end of Terminal D at 11:43, walking with the unhurried confidence of a man executing a well-rehearsed plan. He wore a charcoal business suit, carried a leather briefcase in his right hand, and moved through the sparse late-night crowd like someone catching a routine international flight. No nervousness, no backward glances, just calculated predation disguised as ordinary travel. He reached gate D12 and approached the counter. I couldn't hear the exchange from 30 yards away, but I watched him slide the Canadian passport across to the gate agent with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd done this before. The agent scanned it, checked her screen, and smiled. "Mr. Reeve, you're boarding Group 2, she said, voice carrying in the quiet terminal. "We'll call you in just a few minutes." Lyle nodded, took the passport back, and moved to the seating area near the boarding line. 7 years, he'd sat at my table, held my grandson, kissed my daughter. 7 years building this escape route while pretending to be family. I watched his hands rest steady on the briefcase handle. No tremor, no tells, just the cold calculation of a man who'd infiltrated my company, married my daughter, and systematically stolen $18.3 million as revenge for a father who'd lost everything to my business practices. And I recognized that calculation because I'd used the same ruthless efficiency 40 years ago, when I'd bankrupted Gerald Carson's maritime firm, taking their client base and leaving Carson with nothing. Predation ran in multiple bloodlines. The difference was I'd done it in the open through legal business warfare. Lyle had done it through fraud theft and a 7-year lie. At 11:46, the gate agent announced boarding for Group 1. Lyle stood smoothing his suit jacket, preparing to join the line. Agent Marcus Holloway stepped through the jetway service door first. 43 years old, 2 decades into FBI white-collar investigations, he moved with the practiced invisibility of someone who'd arrested dozens of fleeing executives. Agent Sarah Drummond followed 36 and specialist in financial crimes, holding the arrest warrant and evidence manifest in her left hand. They crossed the 15 feet to Lyle in 6 seconds. "Lyle Thornton," Holloway said, voice flat and procedural. "FBI, face the wall. You're under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy." Lyle froze. The briefcase slipped from his hand and hit the terminal floor with a heavy thud that echoed through gate D12. 8 minutes before cabin doors would have sealed. 8 minutes from escape. Drummond moved behind him, cuffing his wrists while Holloway retrieved the briefcase and set it on the gate counter. The agent who'd called Lyle Mr. Reeve 60 seconds earlier now backed away, eyes wide. "I want my attorney," Lyle said, the only words he spoke. Holloway recited Miranda rights while Drummond photographed the briefcase documenting the evidence seizure. The handful of passengers waiting to board watched in silence as federal agents processed the arrest with efficient, practiced movements. By 11:51, Lyle was cuffed, the briefcase was tagged, and Drummond was escorting him toward the terminal exit, while Holloway coordinated with airport security. Russell stood. "It's done. Drummond's texting Bettina's attorney now. She'll know within 30 minutes. We walked through the terminal in silence past security checkpoints and shuttered shops out into the December night. The parking structure was nearly empty at this hour. Russell's car was on level 3, and we didn't speak until we were on the highway heading south toward Galveston. "She'll call me," I said finally. "She'll call, and I won't know what to say that doesn't destroy her further. She made her choices, Lester," Russell said quietly. "October, November, every day she chose to protect the imposter over your company, over you, over Soren. Tonight she gets to live with those choices." I stared out the window at Houston's nighttime sprawl, imagining my daughter receiving the text from her attorney at 12:15 a.m. Husband arrested, federal charges, $2 million seized. And tomorrow today now, since we'd crossed into December 15th, she would walk into the Harrington Maritime boardroom for the shareholders meeting and see her real brother's face for the first time in a decade. How do you tell your daughter her husband is arrested, her son is an imposter, and her real brother is alive, and still expect her to function in 9 hours? You don't. You let her shatter tonight so she can face the reckoning tomorrow. Russell's dashboard clock read 12:28 a.m. when my phone vibrated in my jacket pocket. I pulled it out. Bettina's name on the screen, calling from whatever darkness she was drowning in after her attorney's text had arrived 13 minutes ago. My thumb hovered over the answer button. Russell's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror, steady and questioning. I thought about Soren spending 26 days in a garage processing the sister who'd known he was alive and chosen the imposter anyway. I thought about the shareholders meeting in 8.5 hours where Bettina would have to face the consequences of every choice she'd made since October 15th. I thought about the fact that comfort now would only delay the devastation waiting for her in that boardroom. I let the call ring through to voicemail. The phone stopped vibrating. The highway stretched empty ahead. And somewhere in Houston, my daughter was alone with the wreckage of her choices 9 hours from the moment when every lie would collapse, and she'd have to look her real brother in the eyes and explain why she'd chosen a stranger over him. I arrived at Harrington Maritime headquarters at 7 a.m., 3 hours before the board meeting that would change everything. Bettina walked in at 8:57, with Thane half a step behind her left shoulder. She'd chosen to fight with the imposter at her side rather than face this morning alone. She looked like she hadn't slept. Dark circles, wrinkled suit hair pulled back with less precision than usual. She'd spent the night processing her husband's arrest. Now she was here defending the man who'd helped destroy her family. Thane stood beside her, 37 surgically precise in every feature, his face a masterwork of manufactured identity. The absence of a burn scar was the one tell he'd never anticipated mattering. Elmer Delaney called the meeting to order at 9 a.m. sharp. 12 board members filled the mahogany table. Senator Whitfield occupied the observer seat. Russell sat beside me with 3 folders of evidence. This emergency session addresses identity verification for trust execution purposes, Elmer said. Dr. Sinclair, you have the floor. Dr. Verna Sinclair laid out the DNA evidence with clinical detachment that made genetic impossibility sound like mathematics. 0 probability of biological relation between the individual seated beside Mrs. Thornton and the Harrington family line. She said, sliding packets to each board member. No familial match across any marker set. Bettina's jaw set. She didn't speak. Russell followed with signature analysis, 12-point variance across pressure points, loop, formations, terminal strokes. Professional conclusion, deliberate forgery. Thane sat motionless, playing the wrongly accused son until the very end. You have the floor for rebuttal, Elmer said to Bettina. She rose slowly, hands flat on the table. My son has been Soren Harrington for 7 years. Whatever evidence you've manufactured. The boardroom doors opened. Soren walked in with Captain Osborne at his right. My son crossed the threshold wearing a dark blue button-down left sleeve, already rolled to his elbow, exposing the massive burn scar running from shoulder to forearm. Jagged purple-pink tissue, etched in waves, a topographical map of survival. He walked to the center of the room and stopped 10 feet from where Bettina stood, frozen. My name is Soren Harrington, he said quietly. I survived an explosion 10 years ago that left this scar and took my memory. I'm home now. The water bottle in Thane's hand slipped. It hit the table with a hollow thud. No, Thane whispered. You died. The boat... I didn't die, Soren said, turning to face him. I woke up in a Nassau clinic 3 weeks after the explosion. It took 10 years to find my way back. But I'm standing here, and you've been sitting in my life. Silence held the room. Soren, Bettina's voice came out barely above a breath. Hey, Betts, his voice was soft. It's really me. One tear tracked down her cheek, then another. Her mouth opened, but grief had taken language. She'd defended a stranger for months, chosen the imposter over her real brother, and now stood watching him breathe alive, scarred home, while everything she'd built on lies collapsed around her. Thane reached toward her shoulder, and she recoiled like his touch burned. Don't, she whispered. Don't touch me. Her knees buckled. She caught the table edge barely. The color had drained completely from her face. She was staring at the scar, physical proof she couldn't argue, couldn't dismiss, couldn't survive, and I watched my daughter break in slow motion while her real brother watched her understand exactly what she'd lost, defending a stranger who'd stolen his face. Bettina stayed standing in that boardroom spine, rigid, refusing to look at me or Soren. Agent Holloway crossed the threshold at 9:16 with Miranda card in hand. She raised her palm before he spoke a word. That won't be necessary. Agent, she said, voice steady despite the devastation I'd watched break her minutes earlier. I will stipulate to the record, not because I'm cornered, but because I am tired. Holloway stopped. Mrs. Thornton, you have the right to... I tracked Thane Prescott for 18 months. Bettina interrupted, addressing the full board. Located him at a Galveston waterfront bar in August 2021. Spent 6 months observing his mannerisms, speech patterns, physical build. In August 2022, I approached him with a proposal, $50,000 for preliminary facial reconstruction, $200,000 upon successful family integration, $250,000 final payment upon trust execution. Elmer leaned forward. Bettina, I strongly advise. I coordinated 3 surgical procedures. She continued, each word clipped and precise. 14 months of work, bone structure modification, scar tissue removal, eye color alteration. Total cost, $487,000. Paid from an inheritance account my mother left that Dad never knew existed. She turned to face me directly. I ran psychological conditioning for 6 weeks. Taught Thane how to hold a halyard rope, read shipping manifests, speak with Soren's terminology. I showed him photographs, played voice recordings, drilled him on family stories until he could recite them without hesitation. I targeted the estate systematically, knew the trust executed when Soren turned 38, knew presenting him after 10 years would trigger paternal guilt. I planned for every contingency except the one that happened. Which was? Holloway asked. The real Soren coming home, she said, glancing at her brother. I believed the explosion had killed him. I was filling a void with someone who could carry the name forward. I was wrong. She turned back to me. In her eyes I saw something I hadn't seen since she was 8 years old, desperate need for acknowledgement. I didn't do this for money, she said quietly. The trust was leverage, not objective. I did this so he would finally look at me, just once. So he would see me as something other than the acceptable daughter who managed paperwork while he built ships with his real child. She held out her wrist to Holloway. I'm ready now. They escorted her out at 9:37 a.m. 6 hours later, I stood at the end of a secure holding corridor while Soren sat across from Bettina through security glass 38 and scarred beside 42 in handcuffs. You wired money to keep me in the Caribbean, Soren said. Monthly payments to Captain Osborne and 3 other operators. You weren't just hiding Thane. You were preventing me from coming home. Yes, Bettina said. Why? Because if you came back before December 15th, everything collapsed. Her voice cracked. I needed Dad to need me for something. Anything. Even if that thing was fraud. I didn't stay because of your money, Soren said. I stayed because I wasn't strong enough to face family memories. The explosion took everything, my identity, my confidence, my sense of belonging. But when I was ready, I came home. He leaned forward. I am still your brother. Tears spilled down her cheeks. You were always better than me, she whispered. No, Soren said. I was just luckier. I got the explosion that stole my memory. You got the father who forgot you were there. Neither of us deserved what we got. Soren stood, touched her shoulder, and turned toward the door. His eyes met mine down the corridor. No accusation, just one question. I couldn't answer what had I done, or failed to do, that made my daughter believe a crime was the only way to make me look at her. My daughter walked out in federal custody and didn't look at me as they let her past. I spent 3 days after Bettina's transport answering Soren's unspoken question about what I'd failed to do as a father. The answer was waiting in a Houston law office where trust documents turned neglect into numbers and gave me one last chance to choose family over empire. David Brennan, 59 and 3 decades administering Houston's largest estate trusts, read the distribution terms with quiet neutrality on December 18th at 10 a.m. We sat in his downtown conference room, me, Soren, Russell, and Elmer, while Brennan formalized what I'd restructured in the 72 hours since Bettina's confession. 40% voting equity and operational control to Soren Harrington. Brennan read, 40% to the Francis Harrington Foundation for Maritime Family Services, established December 16th, with charter mission to locate missing maritime workers, support disappearance investigations, and fund advanced burn treatment research. Soren's head snapped up. You're naming it after Mom? She used to say money is just paper unless it brings people home, I said quietly. Took me 10 years to understand what she meant. 20% voting equity to the Bettina Harrington Education Trust. Brennan continued, held in independent trustee control during federal sentence and, for 5 consecutive years, post-release with 0 recidivism, at which point full distribution rights transfer to her. Elmer leaned forward. You're giving her 20% after what she did. I'm giving my daughter a reason to come home when she's served her time, I said. There's a difference. And that's $80 million, Elmer said, after orchestrating the largest maritime fraud in Texas history. Yes, I said simply. Russell watched me with the expression of someone who'd spent 3 months building a prosecution case and was now witnessing its architect choose mercy over justice. He didn't object. He'd seen what I'd seen in that holding corridor, Soren, forgiving his sister while she sat in handcuffs. Bettina may not liquidate, transfer, or leverage the equity, Brennan continued. She may only vote on governance matters and receive annual dividends. The principal remains protected in perpetuity. So she can't sell it, Soren said. She can only be family. Correct, I said. 40% bearing Francis's name felt like keeping a promise 8 years too late, but still worth keeping. She'd spent her final months before cancer took her, in 2016, making me swear I wouldn't stop searching for Soren. I'd failed that promise for a decade. The foundation wouldn't bring her back, but it might bring other missing mariners home to families who still had time. $4 million annually. Brennan confirmed. Tracking services for 200 active cases per year. Family support for 300 more. Research funding for 12 major grants. Soren looked at me across the table, burn scar visible on his left arm. This is because of what happened to me. This is because of what happened to us, I corrected. You disappeared. Your mother died begging me to keep searching. And when you finally came home, you had scars that should have killed you and a sister who'd paid people to keep you away. If the foundation prevents one family from living through that, it's worth every dollar. After Russell and Elmer left, Soren and I sat alone with trust papers between us. Are you certain about this? He asked. $80 million after everything she orchestrated. I slid the final clause document across the table. Read the last line. Soren read aloud. Your brother forgave you in a corridor. I am forgiving you in a trust. Now forgive yourself and come home. He set it down slowly, then pushed it back toward me unsigned. Before you send this to her cell, he said quietly, add one line. Tell her I'll be waiting when she gets out. My pen hovered over the addendum space, understanding my son had just offered grace. He'd spent 38 years learning to give grace. I was only beginning to understand myself. I added Soren's line to the trust document that night. Your brother will be waiting when you get out, and sent it to Russell for delivery to Bettina's intake cell. 2 days later, Russell called at 8:30 on the morning of Lyle's arraignment. Changed your mind about attending? No, I said. I was sitting in my Galveston study with Soren across the desk, reviewing shipping manifests for routes he'd managed starting January. Tell the prosecutors justice doesn't need my attendance to work. 7 counts, Russell said. Conspiracy wire fraud, money laundering, obstruction, identity fraud, conspiracy, and 3 counts fraudulent disclosures. 18 to 22 years federal penitentiary. His attorneys recommending plea, but Lyle's demanding trial. I watched Soren circle a notation about Caribbean freight logistics, the same routes he'd worked for 8 months, under the name Ben Carroll. Lyle's courtroom theater was somebody else's story now. Russell called back at 11:15. He refused the plea. Trial starts March. Evidence is overwhelming. Cayman Bank records, Thane's audio recordings, Harbor Eye server access logs. He's looking at the full 22 years. And Thane accepted a deal yesterday, 5 years for conspiracy and identity fraud, full cooperation against Lyle in exchange for reduced sentence. Sitting in my study while Russell described a courtroom I wasn't attending felt like watching storm reports from a hurricane that had already passed. The damage was cataloged. The rebuilding had started. What mattered was the man across from me, learning the business his mother had begged me to teach him before cancer took her. Dad, Soren said, looking up from the manifest. You still with me? I'm here, I said. Where were we? Nassau Customs protocols, he said, so I explained them. 2 days later, I attended Bettina's sentencing at Galveston County Courthouse. She wore county orange. Her attorney stood beside her as the judge read terms. 7 years custody, 4 years minimum before halfway housing consideration, plus $2 million civil restitution. Cooperation regarding co-conspirator assets noted as sentencing mitigation. Remanded immediately. Bettina nodded once, didn't look at me in the gallery. Afterward, Russell found me in the hallway. She asked if you were here. I told her you were waiting outside. She nodded and went with the bailiff. I handed him the sealed envelope containing the trust documents, 42 pages giving my daughter 20% of an empire, and one sentence telling her she was still family. She needs to read this tonight, I said. The first night is the hardest. I want her to know she's not alone. Russell delivered the documents at 8 p.m. Bettina received them at 8:45. The next morning he arrived at my door with a single piece of county jail stationery folded in half. She sat with the trust documents for 2 hours, he said, then wrote this. I unfolded the page. 3 words in Bettina's careful handwriting. That was all. 3 words acknowledging 42 pages of mercy, $80 million in protected trust, and 2 sentences telling her she was forgiven and her brother was waiting. What should I tell her? Russell asked. Tell her I got it, I said. 3 words, I got it. I placed the page on my bedroom shelf beside Frances's diary. The room didn't feel hollow anymore. The shelf that had held only memories now held the first fragile thread of reconciliation. It's a start, Frances, I said quietly. That night, Soren found me reading Bettina's 3 words for the 10th time. What does it say? He asked. I handed him the page. He read it was silent for 10 seconds, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite parse. Should I write her back? He asked quietly. The question I'd been avoiding since Russell delivered the letter. Could my son write to the sister who'd paid to keep him away, who'd replaced him with a stranger who was now serving 7 years without choosing sides in a family barely beginning to heal? Or was choosing not to write, also choosing sides? I told Soren to write to his sister if he wanted to, that choosing reconciliation wasn't choosing sides. He nodded and disappeared into his office for 2 hours. When he emerged, he handed me a sealed envelope addressed to Bettina and said he'd said what needed saying. I didn't ask what that was. The Frances Harrington Foundation paperwork arrived December 29th, with Soren's signature as executive director already dried on the incorporation page, and I understood my son had spent the week building his mother's legacy while I'd been paralyzed, wondering whether to answer my daughter's 3-word letter. The foundation charter listed mission parameters: maritime disaster survivor, support, missing mariner, tracking networks, family liaison services during disappearance investigations, DNA matching coordination with Caribbean port authorities, advanced burn treatment research funding. Soren had transferred the entire Harbor Eye patent $47 million in updated valuation as founding endowment. I found him in the Harrington Maritime conference room reviewing foundation operational budgets. You donated the patent, I said. The patent is worth more as Mom's foundation endowment than it ever would be as my inheritance, Soren said without looking up from the spreadsheet. 47 million can find a lot of missing sailors, maybe prevent other families from losing a decade like we did. I sat across from him, seeing Frances in the set of his jaw, the methodical way he organized numbers into purpose. Your mother would have built this foundation 20 years ago if I'd listened, I said. You're smarter than I was. I just had a better example of what happens when you don't, Soren said quietly. Senator Whitfield called that afternoon with news that Clause 47B had been struck from Texas maritime commerce legislation by 9-1 Commerce Committee vote. Your testimony killed it, Lester, Whitfield said. But your son's foundation made them embarrassed. They'd considered it in the first place. Hard to justify devaluing maritime patents when a Harrington just donated $47 million to help the industry. Legacy transformed from tragedy. My son turning a decade of loss into institutional help for families I'd never meet. Frances would have been proud. Bettina's letter mentioned 47 dead-tone calls before she stopped trying to tell me the truth, the same number as the $1 million valuation of the patent Soren just donated to find missing sailors. And I wondered if forgiveness requires noticing the numbers that haunt us, or learning to stop counting altogether. The second letter from Bettina arrived December 30th, pages long instead of 3 words. I read it in my study while afternoon light slanted through the windows. She detailed her journey the October night, discovering the imposter on kitchen tile, the 47 calls to my voicemail, trying to confess before Thanes Harbor call at 4:07 a.m. on October 15th, the choice to stay silent because my voicemail felt safer than my judgment. She described watching Soren walk through the boardroom doors, seeing the brother she'd buried, standing alive with a burn scar that proved everything. I understood I'd spent 7 years protecting a ghost, while the real person waited in the Caribbean. She wrote, I chose wrong, I chose fear over truth, comfort over courage, the imposter over my brother. I'll use these 7 years to figure out why I break when it matters. When I walk out, if you're still willing to look, I'll be here. I read the letter 3 times before setting it beside her, first 3-word message on my desk. If you're still willing to look. She'd spent 42 years believing I wasn't. December 31st. At midnight, Soren and I sat on the veranda overlooking Galveston Bay, where I'd spent 10 years alone watching water and waiting for a son who'd been alive the entire time. Fireworks bloomed over the harbor, reds and golds reflecting off black water, the sound rolling across the bay like distant thunder. Anchor, the old retriever, who'd spent a decade waiting on this veranda beside me during the missing years, finally had both Harringtons present to rest between. He lay with his gray muzzle on Soren's knee-tail, wagging exactly 3 times against the wooden deck, same rhythm as the year I'd rebuilt one wag, for the son who came home, one for the daughter, who might one for learning the difference between building empires and building families. "Are you all right, Dad?" Soren asked, watching me watch the fireworks. I was quiet for a long moment, considering the question honestly. "Not sure all right. Matches the Ledger's son," I said finally. "Lost a decade, nearly lost a daughter. Built an empire, but forgot to build a family. Your mother died begging me to keep searching, and I failed that promise for years." Another firework exploded, gold cascading into silver. "But I think I'm finally learning how to live instead of just remaining alive," I said. "And you're here. That counts for something." Soren reached over and gripped my shoulder once, then released. We sat in silence, watching the bay light up with celebration, while Anchor's tail thumped 3 more times against the deck. After midnight, I went to my study and pulled out Harrington Maritime letterhead. Wrote a single line in the careful script Francis had always said made my handwriting look like a maritime contract. Sealed it in an envelope addressed to Bettina at the correctional facility. Zelda Blanchard, 54, and handling Harrington household correspondence for 15 years, knew which letters required priority processing and which required discretion. This one required both. I found her in the kitchen, preparing New Year's breakfast. "And this needs to reach the correctional facility by January 2nd, I said, handing her the envelope. "Can you ensure priority processing?" "I'll handle it personally, Mr. Harrington," Zelda said, taking the envelope with the practiced care of someone who understood some letters carried more weight than others. "She'll have it by Wednesday morning." I watched Zelda leave with the envelope, thinking about circular structures. The story started with the wrong son calling me father at 4:07 a.m. on October 15th over a phone line crackling with deception. It was ending with the right daughter reading 4 words I'd written in ink on December 31st. "Father will be here." Voice to paper, false son to true daughter. Both messages beginning with the same word, addressing the same man who'd spent 42 years building wealth and forgetting family. 7 years from now, Bettina would walk out of custody to find her father, 68, turned 75, her brother 38 turned 45, and a foundation bearing her mother's name that had turned tragedy into help for maritime families who still had time to come home. The question wasn't whether I'd be here. It was whether she'd forgive me for taking 42 years to learn how to be a father instead of just an empire. But I'd be waiting to find out. And to you listening to my story, remember this revenge might feel justified, but mercy is what rebuilds what was broken. Don't make the mistake I made for 42 years. I built a $200 million empire while my daughter felt invisible. I was so focused on success that I didn't see her desperation until she'd orchestrated a conspiracy that nearly destroyed us all. If I'd looked at her, really looked, maybe family betrayal wouldn't have become her only path to my attention. Family betrayal cuts deeper than any business deal gone wrong. But here's what I learned. Forgiveness isn't weakness, it's strength. When my real son came home with burn scars and chose to forgive his sister instead of condemning her, he taught me more about grace than I'd learned in 6 decades. I believe God put me through this to show me that empire means nothing if you're alone at the top. The lesson isn't about punishing those who hurt you. It's about choosing family even when they've broken your trust. Now, I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my position? Would you have forgiven the daughter who orchestrated the family betrayal or walked away? Leave a comment below. Your perspective matters. If this story moved, you please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to Revenge Dad for more stories about choosing what's right over what feels justified. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time means everything to me. One final note. While the core message is real, some details have been fictionalized for storytelling and impact. What matters is the lesson about family forgiveness and the courage it takes to rebuild broken trust.